Chapter 76. George should not be underestimated. When I learn alchemy in the future, I will definitely build such a magic school bus for the mutant school. Seeing this, George couldn't help but sigh in his heart. In fact, he has always had an idea in his heart. That is to reopen the mutant school, but it will no longer be named the mutant school, but the superpower human school. The era of mutants is gone forever, but it still leaves a strong mark in the historical archives of major forces. The students in the school can't stay in school all the time. Sooner or later, they have to learn to integrate into human society to live, and they must not continue like this. If the mutant school is reopened, it will inevitably remind people of the past. The name of mutant will make people think of it as another race, and sooner or later they will be excluded. So simply change the name to the superpower human school. In addition to cultivating mutant children in the school, some children with superpowers can also be accepted as students, and various superheroes can be accepted as teachers. In this way, the label of mutants can be diluted, and many current and future superheroes can be attracted to stand on their side. If the school encounters trouble again, he doesn't need to do anything, the teachers and students can handle it, and he can study his magic in peace. No need to worry about trivial matters. Of course, this is just a preliminary idea. Whether it can be implemented and how to implement it need to be decided according to the subsequent development. In less than 10 minutes, the night bus stopped at the door of the Leaky Cauldron. "Goodbye, Mr. Thunberg." After saying hello to the wizard ticket seller, George got off the bus with his luggage. When entering Diagon Alley from the Leaky Cauldron, it was completely dark. Most of the shops in Diagon Alley were closed, and only a few wizards were left on the street. The icy cold wind blew across his face, which seemed to foreshadow the troubles that would come next. Along the cobblestone path, passing through Partridge's Crucible shop, Giggs' pharmacy, and Florine's cold drink shop, George came to Nocturne Alley opposite Gringotts and strode in. There were almost no people in Diagon Alley at night, but Nocturne Alley was just the opposite. Many dark wizards liked to come to Nocturne Alley at night to buy and sell some prohibited items. So George never went out at night before, it was too dangerous. But now, he doesn't care so much. Isn't this little Dora? Is she back from vacation? Not long after entering Nocturne Alley, a skinny old wizard blocked George's way, and then looked at George's suitcase with ill intentions. Seeing this, other dark wizards nearby did not come up to stop him, but stopped and watched the show with gloating. Many dark wizards here know George, and know that he is the little slave adopted by old Merlin in the potion shop. But now this little slave not only inherited a large amount of old Merlin's inheritance, but also went to Hogwarts to study, which naturally made them feel a little unhappy and jealous. Most of their wealth is not as good as old Merlin. It's just that old Merlin had just died before, and those Aurors often went to the store, and George rarely went out, so they didn't have much chance. However, now, half a year has passed, and the Aurors no longer come. It just happened to be at night, so there is no reason to let it go. Killing is impossible. Killing a Hogwarts student will definitely be wanted by the entire Ministry of Magic, and he will no longer be able to mix in the British wizarding world. But there is definitely no problem with robbing. The Aurors can't go to war for robbery, especially since this is in an alley. He can only blame himself for his bad luck. "I think you'd better get out of the way." George drew out his wand like lightning and pointed it at the old wizard. The sharp blade flashed with cold light and flew out of George's sleeve and stopped at the old wizard's neck. How can it be so fast? Feeling the cold murderous intent of the sharp blade at his neck, the old wizard's face was full of horror, and other wizards nearby also showed unbelievable expressions. The object relocation charm is not a very profound spell. It can be used to move things in daily life. In battle, it can also block the enemy's magic by moving objects, or directly hit the enemy. Unlike the levitation spell, which makes things float and you have to move them yourself, the relocation spell can move objects directly. What shocked everyone was not that George had learned the relocation spell, but the speed at which George used the relocation spell. With almost no movement of waving the wand or chanting the spell, the moving blade flew to the old wizard's neck, and the key blade was so fast that people had no time to react. This level of relocation spell is already at the master level. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, when seeing George waving and chanting spells, experienced old wizards would take the lead in using magic attacks, and at worst, they could defend or dodge. It was precisely because George was too fast that the old wizard was caught in the vitals before he could react. If George wanted to, he could completely control the blade to cut the old wizard's neck. "Little Dora, I don't have any other intentions, I'll get out of the way, I'll get out of the way now." The old wizard swallowed his saliva and slowly stepped back to make way. Seeing this, no one dared to step forward to stop him. The most important thing in the world of dark wizards is that the strong are respected. If you don't have strength, everyone will want to tear a piece of flesh from you. If you have strength, naturally no one will dare to provoke you. If your strength is strong enough and can bring them benefits, they will rush to follow you. With a wave of the wand, George retracted the blade and continued to move forward with the box. When passing by the old wizard, Paige, who was standing on the box, stretched out his claws and grabbed the old wizard, and immediately tore off half of his wizard robe. If George hadn't stopped it from moving, it would have gone straight forward to crush the old wizard's head. The old wizard hurriedly retreated and sat on the ground in fear, but he didn't dare to fight back against George and Paige, but just used the repair spell to repair the damaged wizard robe. This guy, the future can't be underestimated. At this moment, George's small back and his owl left a deep impression in the hearts of all the dark wizards. At such a young age, he actually has such magical abilities, and the key is that calm attitude. Even the former Dark Lord is not as good as him at this age. Well, showing your claws appropriately can prevent these guys from coming to cause trouble again. George pulled his suitcase and soon arrived at the door of his potion shop. Of course, he didn't use the relocation charm just now. He knew how to use it, but it was just average. It was good for moving things around, but not for fighting. He used his magnetic control just now, and he took out his wand just to cover it up. Chapter 77, Hit Until You Are Willing to Teach. Sure enough, it was really looted. Pushing the door open and walking into the potion store, George couldn't help but twitching at the corner of his mouth when he looked at the messy scene inside. At this time, the potion shop was in a mess, and it looked like it had been robbed. It was obvious that a dark wizard had come in and robbed it during the 6 months he went to Hogwarts. Fortunately, he had already sold all the valuable things, so the other party probably returned empty-handed. Restored to the original condition. Waving his wand and casting a repairing spell, the messy potion shop quickly returned to the way it was before he left. The main reason is that he hasn't learned the protective spell yet. Otherwise, he can lay down some anti-lock spells and protective spells before leaving, so that ordinary dark wizards can't get in. This kind of petty thief dark wizard is not very strong. A truly powerful dark wizard cannot do such a shameful thing. Cleaned up. After cleaning up and packing his luggage, George began to stay up late and read again. The magic book he is reading now is called A Preliminary Introduction to Wandology. It is a magic book that specifically explains the knowledge of wands. The publisher is Ollivander, the master wand maker. It explains a lot about wands. Of course, there is only widespread knowledge about magic wands, and there is no mention of how to make them. A wand is mainly divided into 2 parts, the wand wood and the wand core. Not all wood is suitable for making wands. Only trees that contain magical qualities can be used to make wands. This kind of tree is very rare and difficult to find. It looks like ordinary trees of the same species, and it takes years of experience to identify the differences. But there is also a relatively simple method, which is to see if there is a bowtruckle nest on the tree. Generally, trees with bowtruckle nests can be used to make wands. Different types of trees produce wands with different characteristics. Finding a wand that matches your own characteristics can help you cast spells with twice the result with half the effort. For example, a wand made of acacia tree can only be used to its full power by the most talented wizards, otherwise it will emit strange noises and unpleasant smells, which will greatly reduce the power of magic. Wands made of alder wood like wizards who are kind-hearted and helpful, wands made of apple wood like wizards with goals and ideals, wands made of cedar wood like wizards with strong personalities and loyal characters, and so on. The length, stiffness, and elasticity of the wand also affect the wand's power. The core of the wand is even more critical. It is much more important than the wood of the wand. The increase in the magic power of the wand mainly depends on the choice of the core. It is usually made of the hair and organs of magical animals, such as Vela's hair, Thestral's tail feathers, Troll's beard, bird-shaped man-eater's heart nerves and White River monster's back spines, etc. The most precious among them are the tail feathers of the unicorn, the heart nerves of the fire dragon and the tail feathers of the phoenix. Unicorn tail hair. Seeing this, George silently took out a small box from the suitcase, then opened it, revealing several bundles of unicorn tail hairs inside. He knew that wizards like Ollivander were probably not short of money, so it would be very difficult to spend gold and galleons to teach him how to make a wand. That's why he prepared this rare unicorn tail hair. As the most sacred magical animal, unicorns can be said to be full of treasures. Unicorn blood can sustain life, even if you are on the verge of death, you can forcefully continue your life. Unicorn horns can be used to make high-grade potions, and 1 gram of powder is worth 21 gold galleons. Unicorn tail hair is the best material for making wands. However, the number of exclusive beasts is extremely rare, and there are only a few in the world. There happen to be a few unicorns alive in the Forbidden Forest, although one was killed by Voldemort last year. A few days before leaving school, George secretly left the castle at night and used his wing magic to fly quietly into the Forbidden Forest. Through his psychic ability, he communicated with the creatures in the Forbidden Forest, avoided dangers such as centaurs and acromantula, and found the few surviving unicorns. Then he used magnetic force to control the blade and cut off all the tails of the unicorns at lightning speed, thus harvesting these bundles of snow-white unicorn tail hairs. Anyway, the tail hair of a unicorn is similar to a horse's tail. It will grow back after a few years and will not cause any harm. He didn't believe that with so many unicorn tail hairs, Ollivander couldn't teach him how to make a wand. You must know that a normal unicorn tail has about 2,000 tail feathers. One tail feather can make a top-notch wand, and George harvested the tails of 4 unicorns, which is a total of 8,000. Root and tail hairs. Smash it, and he will smash it until Ollivander is willing to teach him. Early the next morning, George opened the door of the potion shop, and it was already completely white outside. It snowed all night last night, making Nocturne Alley, which usually looks eerie, a little less scary. Stepping on the white snow, leaving a series of footprints, George walked out of Nocturne Alley and arrived at the entrance of Ollivander's wand shop on the south side of Diagon Alley. This is his second visit to this wand store. The first time he came was to buy wands before school started. Ollivander's wand shop can be said to be one of the oldest shops in Diagon Alley. It has been making wands since 382 BC. It looks small and a bit shabby, and the gold sign on the door is peeling off. After pushing the door open and walking in, a ding-dong-ding sound came from the store. "Good afternoon, do you need to buy a wand?" An old man with silver eyes and white hair greeted softly. It was Garrick Ollivander, the owner of this shop. George walked slowly to Ollivander with a smile on his face. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ollivander, my name is George, I am not here to buy a wand, but I want to learn the skills of making a wand from you." "Are you kidding?" Ollivander's face froze, he felt that this little wizard must be playing a trick on him. Hearing this, George took out a large bag of 100 gold galleons and put it on the counter. "I can pay the tuition, as long as you are willing to teach, the tuition is up to you." "Sorry, I can't teach you." Ollivander glanced at the gold galleons on the table, showing a surprised look, and then shook his head decisively. Being able to take out so many gold galleons means that the other party really wants to learn wand-making technology, but wand-making technology is the foundation of the Ollivander family's survival in the wizarding world, so how can it be taught to outsiders casually? Not to mention 100, even if it is 10,000 gold galleons, he can't teach. Seeing Ollivander's resolute expression, George sighed, knowing that it was really impossible to impress Ollivander with gold galleons, and then put the box containing 4 bundles of unicorn tail feathers on the table. "What if I use these as tuition?" Reaching out to open the box, George pushed the box in front of Ollivander. "What is the tuition fee?" "Unicorn tail hair." Ollivander, who was originally calm, almost jumped up on the spot after seeing 4 bundles of unicorn tail hair, and a pair of silver eyes wished to be embedded in the box. Chapter 78. Wand-making skills acquired. "George, from today on, you are my student of Ollivander, and I will definitely do my best to train you to be a master staff maker like me." In the wand shop, Ollivander hugged the box of unicorn tail hairs tightly with trembling hands, and vowed to George. "Don't be too excited, I believe you." George looked at the bloodshot look in the old Ollivander's eyes at this moment, and was deeply afraid that the old man would accidentally lose his eyes because he was too excited. For a wizard like Ollivander who has been studying wands almost all his life, giving him 8,000 unicorn tail hairs is just like a martial arts idiot giving him 8,000 top-level martial arts secrets, and a pervert giving him 8,000 top beauties. Not to mention asking him to teach you the stick-making skills, even if you kneel down and call you daddy, he won't hesitate. Okay, when do you want to start learning? Ollivander managed to calm down his overly excited emotions, and then asked. With so many top-notch wand cores, maybe before he dies, he can really develop the most powerful wand comparable to the legendary Elder Wand, and become a legend in the wizarding world and a legend in the wand-making world. Now, if possible. George didn't want to waste time. The sooner he learned to make wands, the sooner his body and another clone would have wands, and their strength would be greatly increased. Touching the box of unicorn tail hair in his hand, Ollivander didn't hesitate at all. He got up and hung up the closed sign at the door, then took George to the backyard. Since George wants to learn now, he will teach now. So George began a happy holiday cane-making journey. Even on Christmas Day, he did not let Ollivander go, dragging him until it was dark before returning to the potion shop. But on the morning of Christmas Day, he still took some time to pick out various gifts for Paige to give away. Among them were Tonks and her Auror colleagues, Slytherin classmates in the same grade, friends such as Harry, Ron, Hermione, Luna, Ginny, and every professor in the school. Even Dumbledore sent a copy. Of course, they are not expensive things. Although he is not short of money, gifts cannot be too expensive, otherwise it will not be a favor and will become a burden. Because the other party also wants to return the gift. In this way, the time lasted until the day before the end of the Christmas holiday. This one is very good. It can be regarded as a qualified wand. Your wand-making talent is very good, but don't be proud. You should continue to practice after returning to school. Ollivander looked at the wand in his hand, which was made with a troll beard as the core and a pine trunk as the wand wood, and nodded with great satisfaction. At first, he just wanted to teach George casually. Wand making is not an easy craft to learn. Basic material knowledge, wand core processing, wand wood polishing, etc., can't be mastered in just a few months. But what I didn't expect was that George had a very high talent for wand making. First of all, the complex basic knowledge, many of which he understood as soon as he explained it to the other party. Secondly, he had a strong hands-on ability and rarely made mistakes. In just half a month, he successfully made a qualified wand. Although there are still some flaws, they are not very important and can be sold normally if hung in the store. Thank you for your guidance during this period. I will come back to you for advice after the summer vacation. George said goodbye to Ollivander politely, then opened the door and left the wand shop. The reason why he can learn to make wands so quickly is not because of his talent for making wands, but mainly because he has 3 brains to learn together and a physical fitness that is far beyond that of a normal wizard. In addition, I had already read a lot of magic books about wand making in school, so I had a certain foundation. This kid, if he studies wand making in the future, he won't be any worse than me. Looking at George's disappearing back, Ollivander sighed again. Meanwhile, the Fairy Tale Guild. George flew out of the library and landed in the guild hall. He glanced around the hall and asked Myra Jane at the bar. Did you see Natsu? It's so easy to grow trees containing magic in this magical world. You can find a few suitable trees by flying around in the big forest behind the guild. If you want to be more refined, you can spend a little more money and go to a magic store to look for it. With the stick wood, the next step is the stick core. In fact, it is not difficult to make a wand core. There are many magical creatures in this world, and the wizards of fairy tale often take on some crusade missions to defeat some magical creatures that attack towns. It will not be difficult to ask them to bring some fur or horns for themselves when the time comes. No matter how bad it is, he is a magic cat himself. He can barely use a piece of his own hair as a wand core, but the effect will definitely not be very good. He came to Natsu because he heard that Natsu was raised by a fire dragon, could use dragon-slaying magic, and had a physique close to that of a fire dragon. He wanted to see if his hair could be used as a wand core. According to the history books of this world, dragons are the most powerful magical creatures in this world. If Natsu's hair had even 1% of the effect of dragons, it would be stronger than most magical creatures. So he wanted to give it a try. Tell me Natsu. He accepted a mission to find a book and teamed up with Lucy to do the mission. Myra Jane replied gently. Levy, who was standing on the task bulletin board looking for tasks, ran over quickly after hearing the words. Is it the 200,000 book search task? I was still hesitating whether to take it, but Natsu got it first. The 200,000 book search task is relatively less dangerous, but it is a waste of time. When the time comes, the guild will divide it into teams of 3 and divide it equally, so each person will not get much. Minus the round-trip travel expenses, food and lodging, and the consumption of some magic props that may appear, it will be even less. So she had been hesitating whether to take it before. Maybe you are right not to take it, Levy, the task client has adjusted the 200,000 reward to 2 million. At this time, President Makarov jumped down from the second floor and landed on the bar. What, a 2 million reward for finding a book? This is almost the same as the reward for a large-scale crusade task. The wizards in the guild heard the president's words and immediately started to discuss. Many wizards regretted not taking the book search task and missed the 2 million reward in vain. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Natsu was gone, and George returned to the library again, but he also felt that it was right for Levi not to accept the task. High rewards mean high risks, and it is definitely not just a simple book-finding task. And the strength of Levi's team, to be honest, is really not good enough. Levi's 3-dimensional text magic has many effects, but the attack power of each one is too low. The most important thing is that she herself is not good at fighting and has some problems with her mentality. Her 2 teammates are not as strong as her. To be honest, even George, who doesn't have a wand yet, is not his opponent if he takes it seriously. Chapter 79. Voldemort's Diary. Do you have any clues? George, who had just returned to school, looked at Harry and the other 2 and asked with a smile in the Hogwarts library. Before leaving school, he told the 3 kids the password of the Slytherin dormitory that week. No. Harry looked a little frustrated, while Ron said confidently. Although there are no clues, I can be sure that it is definitely Malfoy. Who else in the school can be the heir of Slytherin besides him? But Malfoy's performance at that time did not seem to be lying. Hermione shook her head, not quite agreeing with Ron's statement. On Christmas Eve, the 3 of them successfully used the Polyjuice potion to transform into Malfoy's followers, and entered the Slytherin common room with the password given by George. But they did not get the answer they wanted, because Malfoy did not admit that he opened the Chamber of Secrets. So this battle plan failed. Don't worry, take your time. Even the professors can't find any clues, which means that the heir is hiding very well. George comforted him and continued to read the magic book. Recently, he began to study the Armored Charm, a spell with extremely strong defensive power. In the magic duel before Christmas, he found that this spell was really useful in battle. When the 7th grade wizard cast this spell, it was like a turtle shell, and it could not be broken without a sneak attack from behind. The key is that after a certain understanding of the Armored Charm, he knew that this spell can not only defend against magic, but also physical attacks. Even Muggle guns cannot penetrate the Armored Charm. However, the Armored Charm also has disadvantages, that is, it can only defend one side, and it must continue to use the magic wand to input magic to maintain it, which also means that other magic cannot be launched at the same time to counterattack. If you want to counterattack, you must first stop the defense of the Armored Charm. This disadvantage is nothing for George, because in addition to magic attacks, he also has superpowers. You can use the Armored Charm to defend in front, and then use superpowers to control blades and needles to attack, or directly use a gun to track and shoot in an arc. The only problem is that this spell is a 5th grade spell, which is quite difficult. It will probably take some time to master it if 3 heads learn it at the same time. By the way, we found this, which may be related to the opening of the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago. At this time, Harry took out a small, thin, tattered black cover book from his book bag and placed it on the table in the library. This is a diary with T.M. Riddle's name on it. Ron said he saw it in the trophy display room. Riddle won the Special Contribution Award 50 years ago. And Hermione guessed that it is very likely that he won this award because he caught the person who opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago. Voldemort's Horcrux Diary. George looked at the diary on the table, and his heart felt the evil and powerful soul breath and the tempting spiritual suggestion in it. His face froze, and then he quickly forced himself to return to normal. Then what did you see written in the diary? Nothing, a blank. I tried using the apparition charm and the apparition eraser, but they didn't work, so I want to ask if you have any solution." Hermione replied helplessly. She felt that there must be something recorded in the diary, hidden by special magic. George had read more books than her, and might know how to crack it. George wanted to reach out for the notebook, but soon reason restrained this desire. If he told the three little ones at this time to let them hand over the notebook to him for research, then with the trust of the three little ones in him, they would definitely agree. Then maybe he could use the soul of the young Voldemort in the diary to obtain a lot of knowledge of dark magic. However, reason told him that he must not do this. On the one hand, Dumbledore might have been watching Voldemort's diary for a long time. If he took it from Harry, he would definitely be monitored by Dumbledore, and everything would fall into Dumbledore's eyes. On the other hand, even if he had psychic abilities, he could not guarantee that he would not be tempted by Voldemort's dark magic, which was too dangerous. For safety reasons, it is better not to touch it for the time being. When Dumbledore leaves Hogwarts Castle, he will go to the restricted book area to learn the dark magic, which is safer and more secure. In fact, he tried to find Snape's Half-Blood Prince's notebook to see if he could learn the sharpshooter in advance, but he never found it. However, before the Christmas holiday, Snape revealed that he might teach him a few original spells this semester. I wonder if there is a sharpshooter. I have seen in a book about alchemy that many magic items have their own ideas because they are given the enlightenment spell. If they cannot be recognized by them, their abilities cannot be used. This diary may not be an ordinary diary. Maybe the enlightenment spell is attached. You can try to communicate with it. How to communicate? Harry was confused. Talk to it. I don't know either. Talk to it, or write directly on it. You can go back and try slowly. George smiled and reminded. The three kids thought it made sense, waved to George, and quickly left the library to go back to the common room to try. Thank you, George. You're welcome. George took a deep breath and continued to read the magic book. Some risks can be taken, but some cannot. For a period of time, because Ginny lost her diary and was picked up by Harry, the Chamber of Secrets was never opened again, and the school was temporarily calm again. Half a month later, the mutant school. George looked at the pile of wood in front of him and couldn't help frowning. None is suitable. This is all the types of wood in this world that he asked Leon to send his men to collect, but none of them is suitable for making a wand. Since he learned to make a wand, he must have thought about having one here in Marvel as soon as possible, so that his magic can exert its greatest power. However, this is not Harry Potter and fairy tale after all, and there is no corresponding substitute in a short time. The wand core is easy to say. After his attempts, he can temporarily use the hair of Professor X, the most powerful psychic. If Phoenix Girl is still alive, it should be better to use Phoenix Girl's hair. But the wand stem has not found a suitable substitute. In his imagination, if he could use the trunk of the World Tree as a wand, he could definitely make the top-level magic wand. Unfortunately, the trunk of the World Tree is not something he can get at now. Or the branches on Groot's body should also work, after all, they can be used as the handle of the storm axe. But Groot is in the universe now, and he can't go there now. In fact, in George's opinion, it is not impossible to use other things to make the wand instead of trees, just like the best magic metal Uru metal in Asgard, the effect is definitely not bad. Similarly, he can't get it now. What else can be used as a substitute? Chapter 80, Scientifically Modified Magic Wand. Just as George was thinking about how to find a substitute for the staff in this world, Wolverine made a video call. George, a silver robot-like thing just flew out of Stark's mansion at a very fast speed. This is the photo I took. Wolverine sent over a somewhat blurry photo. It seems that it has been initially completed. Looking at the unpainted first-generation Mark suit in the photo, George knew that Tony Stark had successfully developed the epoch-making weapon steel suit after this period of retreat. Maybe, this guy can be of some help. As soon as his thoughts changed, he had some ideas in his mind. Logan, I'll have Issa pick you up later. What? No need to continue to monitor and protect him. Wolverine had a confused look on his face. George nodded. No, come back and rest. We will officially visit you tomorrow. His idea is simple. Since he can't find a suitable wand wood to make a wand at the moment, why not use the black technology of this world to see if he can use the power of technology to make a wand wood. He does not require that this wand can amplify his magical power like a normal wand, but that it can be used normally so that he can say goodbye to the shortcomings of slow hand gesture casting and allow magic to be effective in battle. At this stage, the only person he knows and has the ability to do this is probably Tony Stark. It just so happens that Tony Stark has developed the Iron Suit, and his plan to counterattack the Ackley Gene Company and solve the hidden danger of Xander Rice can also be put on the agenda. He had been keeping a low profile before and did not go to Dr. Rice's trouble because he was not strong enough. At that time, an X-24 paired with a sniper was a great threat to them. But now, even if he doesn't use magic, he can easily handle it with just the ability to control magnetism. And his magic ability is no longer just a lock-opening spell, but has learned dozens of spells, including some high-level spells. Giant magic and light magic were also introduced during this time. The overall strength has increased more than 10 times compared to before. What's more, he is not alone, and there is Wolverine who has returned to the fighting strength of his youthful peak. If Tony Stark is added to the mix, it is really foolproof. Don't underestimate Tony Stark. Although he only wears the first-generation steel suit, he also has supersonic flight speed and various high-tech weapons for long-range attacks. As long as they don't encounter enemies that restrain their abilities, such as George, most superheroes are no match for him. Now that Dr. Rice has cloned Wolverine, it is naturally possible to clone other mutants. If the delay is too long, he might get a big one. Instead of passively waiting for the opponent to hit the door, it is better to take the initiative. He has already had this idea. If I can get a wand that I can barely use this time, I'll set out immediately. After hanging up the video, George asked Issa to fly to Tony Stark's private mansion in Malibu, California, and pick up Wolverine who was hiding nearby. Not long after Wolverine left, Tony returned wearing a steel suit and smashed it from the roof of his mansion, destroying a multi-million-dollar luxury car. After taking off his steel suit and applying an ice pack, he couldn't help but feel a little more touched when he saw the simple version of the arc reactor that his assistant, Pepper, had packaged for him. Sitting in his studio, he said to his smart butler Jarvis. Jarvis, for the record, when we were above 40,000 feet, the main sensor failed, and there was also some problem with the casing's pressurization. I think it may have been caused by ice. Sir, your observations are very keen. If you intend to enter space, you must improve the shell material. Jarvis gave advice. Tony thought for a moment and ordered. Contact Cisco and ask them to reselect the shell material to the gold titanium alloy used by the Seraph tactical satellite. This can not only ensure the integration requirements, but also maintain its power-to-weight ratio. Understood, sir. Are the graphics displayed according to the required specifications? Okay. The renderings are completed. This color scheme is too cool. Tony looked at the golden steel suit on the computer and couldn't help but shook his head. Using gold all over it would look too nouveau-riche and would lower his taste. It's my fault. You've always been low-key and simple. Jarvis's answer seemed to contain a bit of ridicule, and Tony didn't care. He glanced at the sports car next to him and replied. Add a little bit of that sports car red. Okay, it matches your low-key image. The coloring is done. In a few seconds, a brand new golden red steel suit appeared on the computer. Tony looked at it and nodded with satisfaction. I like it very much, let's put it together. Automatic assembly begins and is expected to be completed in 5 hours. Have you found any relevant information about George? At this time, Tony suddenly thought of something and asked. After returning last time, he did not tell anyone the information about George, including the most trusted Pepper. This was his promise to George. But out of curiosity, he still wanted to know who the George who saved him was. No sir, I searched for all the people named George and found none with the same characteristics as you described. Isn't his name George? Iron Man hesitated for a moment, then ordered. You look up everyone who bought Stark stock after my accident and then sold it before I came back. Yes, sir. After a while, a series of names appeared on his computer. Iron Man took a quick glance and was instantly attracted by a name. Leon. This guy actually bought so much. Check his information. There are many people who meet the requirements. When he had an accident, many people spoke ill of the Stark Group and the stock price plummeted. However, after the Stark Group has been prosperous for so many years, there are still many die-hard investors. But it's not normal to buy so much at once like this. It's actually not him. Even if it's not, it should still matter. Seeing Leon's photos and related introductions, Tony had some guesses in his mind. At this time, a piece of news suddenly broke out on the TV in the studio. The Disney Concert Hall, with its red carpet, is brightly lit and bustling tonight, and Tony Stark's third annual charity ball for the Firefighter Family Foundation will be held here. The elite of Los Angeles upper-class society gather here, and the stars are shining brightly. The initiator of this event, Tony Stark, caused controversy by speaking out loud at a press conference not long ago, and he has since disappeared. Some say he suffered from post-concussion syndrome and was bedridden for several weeks. Jarvis, no need to wait for me. Tony put down the ice pack with an ugly look on his face, got up and left the studio. He was going to make a show tonight to prove that he was not bedridden. Chapter 81. Cooperation with Iron Man. The next day, early morning. The X-Fighter appeared invisible over Iron Man's mansion. George spread his wings and led Wolverine to avoid the guards of the mansion, landed directly from the air to the balcony, and entered the living room of the mansion with the unlocking spell. Tony, who was sleeping soundly at this time, was suddenly awakened by Jarvis's alarm. "Sir, if you find a stranger breaking into the living room, do you want to notify security to remove him?" "No, I'll do it myself." "George." Tony, who was awakened, heard Jarvis's alarm and immediately stood up, wanting to try on the suit he had just assembled, but found that the person who appeared in the camera was actually his previous savior. After getting dressed and asking Jarvis to make himself a cup of coffee, Tony came to the living room. "Amazing magician, I really didn't expect to see you again in my living room. I know who hired those terrorists to attack you." George didn't have any unnecessary nonsense, he just spoke like a king. Tony's expression immediately became serious. "Who is it?" "Obadiah Stane." George blurted out, and Tony's pupils suddenly shrank. "How are you sure it's him?" "Because I am a mutant with psychic abilities, and I have used my powers on Obadiah Stane before," George replied calmly. Tony smiled at this time. "I just guessed that you were a mutant. I thought there were no mutants in this world, but it seems there are still some." At his level, the government's methods to deceive ordinary people are basically useless. Although he has never paid attention to mutants before, he still has some understanding of the general situation. So after seeing George show those magical abilities that day, he had some guesses in his heart. "After I came back, I looked up information about mutants and learned a lot about the history of mutants. Then, if I read correctly, he should be the famous Wolverine. By the way, your hands can really pop out steel claws, like a cat." Turning to look at Wolverine, who was smoking a cigar and drinking his expensive wine, Tony recalled the information he had seen and asked half-jokingly. Wolverine did not answer. He just raised his right hand and quickly popped out 3 wolf claws. Then he slowly retracted the 2 next to him, leaving only the middle one, as if making a middle finger gesture. "Okay, next time you come back there's no wine to drink." Tony turned back to look at George. "Tell me, you came to me specifically to tell me such important information. What are the conditions?" Based on his understanding from the last time he had contact with George, George was not the kind of good person who would help others unconditionally. In addition, he just found out yesterday that George might be related to the Leon family. George asked in surprise. "Don't you doubt the authenticity of my information?" Having only met him once, he didn't believe Tony trusted him so much. Tony sat down on the sofa. "First of all, you saved my life. Whether it was for money or not, I don't think you would come here specifically to lie to me. With your ability, you could have threatened and used me to obtain greater benefits, but you didn't do that. You just made a negligible difference in the stock price. Secondly, I also suspect that this kidnapping incident is related to Obadiah. After all, the group will belong to him once I die, and there are also those group missiles sold to terrorists. Who else has that right except him? Finally, I trust my gut and judgment a lot." He had doubted Obadiah in the cave where the terrorists lived, but their friendship for so many years made him still unwilling to think that way. But until last night's dance, he heard with his own ears that Obadiah had united with shareholders to resign from his position, and he knew that there was definitely something wrong with Obadiah. "You seem to be very smart. George was not too surprised. He would not regard Tony Stark as a fool. This guy's IQ is also the first among all superheroes. If he hadn't had the advantage of knowing the plot, he might not have been able to take the initiative. I really need to find you to cooperate with me on some facts, and I also need you to help me create something. It's okay to make things. If we want to cooperate, you have to first tell me how to cooperate and what to do specifically. George had saved his life. Although it was mainly for money, he was also very grateful in his heart. As long as it didn't violate his principles, he was very willing to help. No problem, you can take a look at this first. George threw a USB flash drive to Tony, who took it and plugged it into the projector in the living room. Soon, a video was projected on the wall cloth in the living room. Inside is the incriminating evidence about those experiments that Gabriella secretly photographed in the Mexican laboratory. After reading it, Tony's face was also very ugly. He didn't expect that there were such inhumane laboratories in the world. To actually use innocent women as surrogates to give birth to mutant children, and then force these children to become murder weapons, is simply inhumane. Tony, to tell you the truth, I am also an experiment in this laboratory. I was originally numbered 757 and was a fusion of multiple mutant genes. Later, we escaped from the laboratory with those children and found Logan to help us come to New York. But Yockley Gene Company has been sending people to find and hunt us. So I want to cooperate with you to destroy Yockley Gene Company and prevent them from using innocent children to conduct cruel experiments. George 9 told Tony the general course of events, half true and half false, half important. He did not mention the mutant school, nor did he mention Professor X, but focused on promoting the evil of Acre genetics. Sure enough, Tony did not doubt George's narration with the video as evidence, but was full of anger. Thinking about the decision he made in the cave and his goal of creating the Mark suit, he slapped the table in front of him and replied, "I will definitely help you destroy Acre genetics. It's done." Getting Tony Stark's affirmative answer, George smiled. In fact, based on his understanding of Tony, even if he was not there, as long as Tony knew what Acre genetics did, he would not ignore it. Superheroes, no matter what, are still good-hearted. By the way, before that, I want you to make something for me. Then George roughly described to Tony what he needed the staff for. Can it be made? It's not too difficult to have a metal stick that allows special energy to flow smoothly, but you have to let me test the nature of this energy before I can design it. Tony thought for a moment and replied. George nodded and took out a marble that stored some of his magic power. It's this kind of energy. Okay, follow me. After Tony got the marble, he immediately took George and Wolverine to the basement. Then he operated the machine to start testing, and soon there was a result. It's not a big problem. According to my calculations, as long as these materials are fused into a special alloy, it should be able to meet your requirements. Chapter 82. Magician George. How long will it take to make it? George's eyes lit up immediately. He just wanted to give it a try, but he didn't expect that there was hope. 2 minutes, what size and color do you need? Tony asked. With the machines in his studio, even a complex Mark suit can be made in just 5 hours. A mere alloy wooden stick can only take 1 or 2 minutes. George thought about it and then said. If it's possible, how about this? Well, it's not difficult, but it will probably take more time. Hearing George's request, Tony thought for a while and replied. In fact, George's request is very simple, that is, since alloy can be used to make the stick wood, it can't play a role in amplifying the power of magic anyway, it can only save casting time, so there is no need to deliberately make it in the form of a small wooden stick. If it's convenient, he can make a ring-shaped wand, which is convenient to carry. Make a sword-shaped one, which can be used as a wand, and can also be controlled by magnetism to strike the opponent with a sword when necessary. Finally, he made a big and thick super mace, which he could use when he could not wear a ring when casting giant magic. He could also cast spells and wield it in close combat. There was no way. He could not find the right material to make a wand. Otherwise, a small wooden stick would be the most suitable. After all, it was the best form that wizards had researched for thousands of years, and the technology was the most mature, which could greatly enhance the power of magic. Now he could only settle for the second best. While waiting for the completion of various wands, George asked Tony. How do you plan to deal with Obadiah? First, we need to find evidence of Obadiah's crime, but he has temporarily dismissed me with the board of directors, and I cannot enter Stark Tower. So I just notified my assistant and asked her to go to my office in the company, hack into the company's system, and copy all the shipping lists. Obadiah's evidence of guilt will definitely be found. Once it is confirmed that he sold weapons to terrorists, he will have to spend his life in prison. Tony confidently gave his own solution. George nodded after hearing this. It was indeed a good idea. He turned his head and looked at Wolverine. Logan, have you ever been a bodyguard before? If you have, follow Tony's assistant and be responsible for protecting her safety. Bodyguard? I've been one too many times. I remember one time I protected a young lady, but ended up protecting her in bed. Her father hunted her for a whole year. Wolverine smoked a cigar and recalled his youthful years. Tony's face froze when he heard this. He turned his head and looked at George and said, I think it would be a problem for you to go and protect my assistant. That's fine with me. George thought about it and nodded in agreement. He was not worried that Wolverine would provoke Pepper, but Wolverine's face was definitely very recognizable to some people, such as those agents of SHIELD. And Wolverine was sometimes impulsive and might make a lot of noise, so it would be safer for him to go over. Not long after, Pepper arrived at the mansion, and George also got the alloy ring that had just been made, and melted Professor X's hair into it with a spell as the wand core, and began to make a scientifically modified wand. Fra Dimension. Put the alloy ring on your finger, then recite the spell and point it at the trash can next to you, and the trash can instantly turned into a kitten, meowing. The magic effect has no increase, but fortunately the casting speed is not worse than a normal wand, which is also as expected. Tony. Ah. Are you sure your friend is really a magician? Pepper and Tony just left the room and happened to see George using the transfiguration spell to turn the trash can into a kitten. Tony was also stunned for a moment, and then explained. Well, you know, magicians' tricks are usually incredible, such as those who turn into pigeons. He is better at turning into a cat. Anyway, you take him with you, and he can use magic to help you escape in danger. Because he was afraid that Pepper would worry, he did not tell Pepper about George's identity and subsequent plans. Okay, Mr. Magician, I'll leave the rest to you. Pepper was skeptical of Tony's explanation. There were indeed magic tricks that could make a dove appear out of thin air in a hat, but she always felt that it was different from what she saw now. And as a magician, how would George protect himself? Was it like the magic in the movie Now You See Me? At your service. George smiled, told Wolverine to protect Tony here, and then followed Pepper to the Stark Group building. After getting in the car, he closed his eyes and rested. It takes several hours to get from Malibu to the Stark Group building in Manhattan. Instead of wasting time, it is better to divert attention to the clones in the other two worlds who are learning magic and speed up learning efficiency. Pepper wanted to ask George a question in the car, but seeing that George closed his eyes and rested, she didn't bother him again. As Tony's personal assistant, she knew all the people Tony came into contact with. Even the women of various identities who stayed overnight were dealt with by her afterwards. Except for the Dr. Ethan who came back with Tony, this was the first time she met Tony's friends she didn't know. It was almost noon when the two finally arrived at the Stark Group building. However, when he entered the lobby on the first floor, he was stopped by a somewhat bald middle-aged man. Miss Potts, I don't know if you have time now. I want to have a good chat with Mr. Stark. You are Agent Carlson from the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Bureau. I have some urgent matters to attend to right now. Please wait for me here. Little Pepper looked at the middle-aged man and thought about it for a moment, then replied somewhat perfunctorily. At this time, George also looked at the middle-aged man and thought to himself. Agent Carlson, that should be Phil Carlson, the 8th level agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He had an impression of this S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. If he remembered correctly, this guy seemed to be a fan of Captain America. He was stabbed to death by Loki during the Chitauri invasion, and finally let Nick Fury use Kree blood. Resurrected. After sizing it up, he withdrew his gaze. Currently, he did not plan to have any contact with the global organization S.H.I.E.L.D. Not to mention Nick Fury's behavior pattern, if he knew of their existence, he would definitely take corresponding measures, just like he would do to aliens. The key is that instead of being called S.H.I.E.L.D., the current S.H.I.E.L.D. is called Snake S.H.I.E.L.D. Most of the Shield's agents have been developed into Hydra agents. Okay, Miss Potts, I'll wait for you here. Coulson had a good temper and didn't care if he was perfunctory. He sat back on the bench next to him with a smile and continued reading the newspaper leisurely. But when George and Pepper left, he quietly set his sights on George. Chapter 83. Hypnosis? Regarding the interpersonal relationship between Tony Stark and Pepper Potts, Coulson has already understood clearly during this period, and George is obviously a new face that he has not seen before. The 20-year-old agent's intuition told him that this new face might not be an ordinary person. His temperament and aura don't quite resemble those of Pepper Potts' men. Look into the information about the man who just came in with Pepper Potts. After George and Pepper disappeared completely, he whispered an order into the small walkie-talkie. And the investigation results were quickly given. No information was found about this individual. There is no information, are you sure? Coulson's face suddenly showed a confused look. You must know that with S.H.I.E.L.D.'s intelligence capabilities, no matter which country it is, as long as there is a household registration record, it should be able to find it. Black household? On the other side, George and Pepper also took the elevator to Tony's office on the top floor. I'll guard the door, you go and do it. George closed the door and signaled Pepper to hack into the system. A somewhat nervous Pepper nodded, trotted to the desk in high heels, inserted the special USB drive Tony gave her into the computer host, and began to invade the group's system. Tony was worthy of being Tony. Within 5 seconds of inserting the USB flash drive, he quietly broke through all the group's defense systems. Oh, my God, it's really him. Looking at the large number of illegal bills in the database and the videos sent by the Ten Rings gang asking Obadiah for money, little Pepper couldn't help but cover her mouth. If this evidence is handed over, it will be enough to put Obadiah in jail. At this moment, the office door was pushed open. Pepper, tell me what I should do. Tony is already so old, and sometimes he is still so worried. You need to help me persuade him. It was Obadiah who knew that Pepper was coming to the company and came here specifically to continue to stabilize Tony through Pepper. When Obadiah appeared, Pepper, who was downloading evidence, was so frightened that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. Confuse the public. At this time, George, who was standing behind the door, stepped forward and cast a confusion spell directly on Obadiah. Obadiah trembled all over after being cursed, and then fell into confusion. It's okay, you continue, he will be in a daze for a while. The confusion spell can confuse the enemy, causing people to be in a state of trance. When they come back to their senses, they will not notice it, and they will just think that they were stunned accidentally. The young wizards at Hogwarts like to use this spell to prank their classmates, and outside wizards often use it to deal with muggles to prevent them from discovering the existence of magic. George is not yet proficient in this spell, and his ring wand cannot amplify the magic effect. Even if it is cast on an ordinary person like Obadiah, the effect can only last for about 1 minute each time. But it doesn't matter, he can play it once a minute, and keep controlling it until Pepper has completely downloaded all the evidence. Well. Seeing Obadiah holding a wine glass at the door as if he was under an illusion and not making any movement, little Pepper felt relieved. In about 5 minutes, all the evidence is downloaded. Check it, don't leave any holes. Seeing Pepper getting up, George reminded him specifically. He remembered that in the movie, it was because Pepper left in such a hurry and left a download completion tag that Obadiah discovered something was wrong and took the risk to seize Tony's arc reactor. Now, although Obadiah doesn't have Iron Overlord and doesn't know that Tony made the iron suit, if he finds out what Pepper did, he will definitely take action to protect himself. After making sure that there were no flaws in the computer, George stopped using the confusion spell. After Obadiah woke up, he didn't notice anything unusual about himself. He just felt that his head was empty for some reason, and he continued to chat with Pepper. Little Pepper was afraid that she couldn't control her emotions and would be exposed. In addition, she had already obtained the evidence, so she immediately made an excuse. I will give Tony some good advice. Suddenly I remember that I have something to deal with, so I'll leave first. Okay, then go and get busy. Obadiah was stunned for a moment, but didn't say anything, smiled and waved. But when Pepper and George left the office, his brows gradually frowned. Why does it feel like something is wrong? So many years in the business field have allowed him to develop unusually keen intuition, especially in observing words and emotions. He always felt that there was something wrong with little Pepper's expression just now, his eyes were not quite right, and the bodyguard was also very wrong. Putting down the wine in his hand, he quickly went to his desk and turned on the computer to check. After seeing that the computer had not been tampered with, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But he still felt vaguely uneasy in his heart, so he quickly picked up the phone on the table. When did Potts join the company, and where is he now? The company that Miss Potts moved to 20 minutes ago has now left, along with the agent who calls himself Carlson. The other end of the phone replied. After hearing this, Obadiah's pupils shrank, and he quickly stood up and ran towards the monitoring room. It took 20 minutes just to come to the office, and I didn't take anything from the office with me when I left. This was obviously a problem. Fortunately, he had installed invisible surveillance in Tony's office a long time ago. Now he could go and check the surveillance to see what Pepper did in Tony's office. What's going on? Is it hypnosis? A moment later, in the monitoring room, watching Pepper downloading things in the surveillance, while he stood there motionless as if he was hypnotized, Obadiah was a little dumbfounded. But he soon realized the seriousness of the matter. Pepper had obtained his evidence of guilt and mixed with the agents. Even if he led people to hunt him down, he didn't know where the other party was now. Walking back and forth in the monitoring room for a few steps, he calmed down and immediately made a phone call. I agree to your cooperation, but you have to help me kill Pepper Potts and his bodyguard who just left the group, and an agent immediately, so that the evidence of my crime cannot be handed over to the government. This is a mysterious big client he has been cooperating with. Every time he wants a lot of weapons, and he has great magical powers. Recently, he wanted to cooperate with him more deeply, but he was afraid of being swallowed up and didn't dare to agree. No problem, they will die in an accident soon. A positive reply came from the other end of the phone. After hanging up the phone, Obadiah was still a little worried, so he immediately began to gather people and rushed to Tony's mansion in Malibu, Los Angeles. What Pepper did must have been instructed by Tony. Since Tony has already doubted him, he can't stay any longer. He might as well kill him and lie to the outside world that it was revenge by the terrorists who kidnapped him before. You were lucky last time, this time I have to take you to see your father in person. Chapter 84. Hydra's Attack. Time goes back to 5 minutes ago. When George and Pepper came out of the office, they were stopped by Carlson again in the lobby on the first floor. Miss Potts, what are you doing now? If you have time, follow us out first. The nervous Pepper didn't dare to stay in the company for a moment. She just wanted to go out and find a safe place to call Tony to report the situation. It happened that Agent Carlson was also a law enforcement officer. If Tony agreed, it should be okay to take the evidence back to him. George on the side didn't say anything when he saw this. He came here just to protect Pepper and get the evidence. As for the follow-up, he didn't care. Whether Tony handed the evidence to S.H.I.E.L.D. or the CIA, it was Tony's own business. So he pretended to be Pepper's bodyguard all the way and didn't talk to Carlson. After the sports car drove a distance out of the company and stopped on a street with few people, Pepper called Tony and reported the situation here to Tony. By the way, Tony, he also said that your father was once a senior executive of their Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. Finally, Pepper added another sentence. Tony, who originally didn't care much about Carlson, changed his attitude immediately after hearing this. Bring him back with me, I want to have a good chat with him. After hanging up the phone, Pepper restarted the sports car and accelerated towards Malibu. Just when the sports car passed an intersection, a black SUV on the left ran a red light and crashed directly into their sports car. Be careful. George reacted quickly, immediately stretched out his hand and smashed the window on the left side of Pepper, and released a floating spell at the black SUV that was about to hit. Wingardium Leviosa. The blue magic light shot at the black SUV, and the black SUV immediately floated up and flew directly over their sports car. Pepper, who was driving, and Carlson in the back seat widened their eyes at the same time. Pepper no longer believed that George was a magician. No matter how amazing the magic was, it couldn't be like this. As for Carlson's first thought, this bodyguard named George is really not simple, and has superpowers. Swish! Just after rushing through the intersection, a large truck in front of them came across and blocked the way of the sports car, forcing Pepper to brake urgently. Get out of the car! He unbuckled his and Pepper's seat belts directly, kicked open the car door, and said to Carlson while pulling Pepper out of the car. Because he saw several SUVs of the same model coming over at the intersection, and the key was that a rocket launcher leaked out of one of the cars. Swish! As soon as the three got out of the car, a rocket head flew straight towards their sports car. However, not only that, other cars also revealed a bunch of submachine guns, aiming at this side and preparing to shoot. Go! At this point, George didn't care about hiding, and directly cast the wing magic to spread a pair of large white wings, holding Carlson in one hand and Pepper in the other hand and flying them up to avoid the explosion below. He didn't expect to be attacked at this time, because this scene didn't happen in the movie. We need to figure out which group of people they are. He didn't fly away with the two of them, but landed on the roof of a house with a parapet on the street. For such a sudden attack, he naturally couldn't just walk away, at least he had to figure out who the other party was targeting. Is it Carlson, or Pepper, or him? If it's the first two, it's not a big deal, but if it's aimed at him, then he has to pay attention. Their firepower is too strong. I've called for reinforcements. Hide here first and don't show your head. As soon as they landed on the roof, bullets from below were madly fired at them. Carlson took out his pistol and wanted to fight back, but he was suppressed and didn't dare to show his head at all. Don't forget that they have a rocket launcher, and this parapet can't stop the bombing of the rocket launcher. George smiled and took out his pistol. Coulson's face also showed a worried look when he heard this. George was right. If this goes on, his reinforcements haven't arrived yet, and he will probably be blown to death. This time it's not a combat mission, so he brought a pistol, otherwise he wouldn't be so embarrassed. Pepper squatted on the ground and asked in fear. What should we do? I'll divert their attention, and you take Miss Potts away. Carlson gritted his teeth and said. It seems that the Carlson in this universe is a good person. George looked at Carlson in surprise. If he went out to attract attention at this time, he would probably not survive. So Carlson was going to save them with his own life. No, I don't know if you have seen Assassin's League. The one played by James McAvoy. Carlson lowered his head. But I like the one he played in Atonement more. You two, this is not the time to talk about movies. Seeing that the two were talking about movies at such a dangerous moment, Pepper was speechless. Don't worry, Miss Potts, I'm a magician, let me show you a magic trick that makes the bullet turn. George casually swung the pistol upwards, and the bullet he fired immediately drew an arc across the wall and hit the man in black who was about to launch the second rocket below. Then I saw him shaking his hands repeatedly, and the bullets fired flew out in various arcs, and soon the sound of shooting below gradually disappeared. Carlson and Pepper carefully poked their heads out from the wall, and found that the men in black who attacked them below were dead, lying on the ground wailing, and none of them could hold a gun normally and attack them. To be honest, I prefer the annoying guy named Barry in the movie, because he also starred in my favorite Jurassic World. At this time, little Pepper was using the topic that she had just finished talking about to ease the shock in her heart. George laughed when he heard this and said, Jurassic World, I didn't expect Miss Potts' taste to be quite unique. Mr. George, I hope to have a good chat with you after communicating with Mr. Stark. Coulson, who was also shocked, took a deep breath and said to George after reacting. According to S.H.I.E.L.D. regulations, superpowers like George must be registered and then be monitored by S.H.I.E.L.D. Let's find out who sent them first. George, who was well aware of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s urinary nature, planned to ask Carlson about the origins of these men in black and happily give Carlson a forgetting spell. Spreading his wings again, he took the two of them back to the street and picked out one of the survivors. George began to use his psychic abilities while simultaneously casting the legilimency spell. It's actually Hydra. Is Obadiah in this universe still connected to Hydra, or is he also a member of Hydra? After a moment, George had a puzzled look on his face. Through his psychic abilities combined with the legilimency spell, he already knew that the group of people who attacked him were actually Hydra agents. The mission goal is to kill all three of them and then disguise the scene as a reasonable car accident explosion. Chapter 85. Wolverine and Iron Man team up. Mr. George, did you find anything? Seeing George pressing his index finger on the forehead of a seriously injured enemy, closing his eyes and not knowing what superpower he was using, Carlson couldn't help but ask curiously. Just now, George said he wanted to find out the identity of the enemy, but he didn't say a word, which made him suspect that George might have the ability of mind reading. As an old agent for more than 20 years, he has a lot of experience in handling superpower incidents, and he has also come into contact with people with the ability of mind reading. Many superpowers were ordinary people before they awakened their superpowers. Even if they had the ability, they didn't dare to compete with the government, and they could be easily controlled. There are also some who want to use their superpowers to commit crimes after getting superpowers, but unfortunately, most superpowers are not as destructive as a pistol. Just like before, there was a guy who could spray high-temperature flames with both hands to melt steel. He felt that he was so powerful that he went to rob a bank, and was finally knocked down by him with a tranquilizer gun. There are some more powerful ones, but under the use of various high-tech weapons by these well-trained agents, basically there are few cases of failure. S.H.I.E.L.D. will no longer allow superpower organizations like the Brotherhood of Mutants and the X-Men to appear. According to his experience, the superpower George in front of him has the best abilities and performance in the face of danger among all the superpowers he has met before. The key is that he has more than one superpower. Such superpowers either choose to join S.H.I.E.L.D. or accept surveillance. I have found some, but I'm sorry, I can't tell you. George raised his hand and shot several seriously injured Hydra agents to death, and then suddenly launched a spell on Coulson. Forget everything, modify memory. He didn't want to get involved in the affairs of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, nor did he want his abilities to be exposed now, so using the Forget spell to modify Coulson's memory and then using the False Memory spell to add some false memories was the best solution. Of course, this method is not safe. S.H.I.E.L.D. agents have undergone special mental training. Even Hawkeye, who is controlled by the Mind Scepter, can use technology to restore his sanity. His forgetfulness spell is not foolproof. But it doesn't matter. After the other party finds the problem and solves the problem to restore his memory, maybe his strength no longer needs to be hidden. The safest way is to kill Coulson, but he is also a person with a bottom line. Just now Coulson thought about using his life to cover their escape. He would not kill just to hide his ability. In fact, he thought about whether to tell Coulson about Hydra, so that S.H.I.E.L.D. would be in chaos and would not have the energy to trouble him. But think about it, this is very valuable information for S.H.I.E.L.D. If S.H.I.E.L.D. needs to do something in the future, it can be used to trade with Nick Fury. Why give it away for free? As for whether not telling S.H.I.E.L.D. will lead to the death of more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, it is none of his business. George, what happened to him? Seeing George suddenly attack Coulson, Coulson entered a state of confusion, and Pepper was also shocked. George smiled and explained. My ability cannot be known to others, so I just hypnotized him. When he wakes up, he will think that he saved us single-handedly. Don't let it slip. Oh, okay. Although Pepper was surprised, she nodded. Before leaving, Tony told her that George was a friend and could be trusted. Are you all right? After the magic was completed, Coulson also opened his eyes and immediately showed concern to the two. Without waiting for the two to answer, several more cars came speeding over, which made George frown. He thought it was still a Hydra agent. But soon he relaxed his brows because Coulson, who was also alert, put down his gun. It's okay, my colleagues came to support. The car stopped, and an Asian female agent wearing a black combat uniform and with a firm look in her eyes took the lead and walked down. Coulson, I haven't seen you for a few days. You have improved a lot. You solved so many by yourself. The female agent looked at the black-clad men who were all killed around her and Coulson who was unharmed, and a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. In her impression, Coulson's skills were not so good. Could it be that the enemy was too weak? Of course, May, don't underestimate me. Coulson laughed immediately after hearing this. He didn't expect the opponent to be so weak, and he was in such a good state today. He was like a gun god, and he never missed a shot. It was also a chance to show off in front of his old partner. May. George, who didn't speak, showed a little surprise on his face. He knew May, a top S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. But in his memory, May at this time should have changed to a civilian job because of killing an inhuman girl. It seems that different universes are still different in many details. After a few words, May took his men to finish the work and trace the origins of this group of people, while Coulson drove another S.H.I.E.L.D. car and continued to Tony's mansion with George and Pepper. Strange, how did he get hit at this angle? After Coulson and the other two left, May found something wrong when he was inspecting the scene. In the evening, Obadiah also rushed to the outside of Tony Stark's mansion with all his men. Remember, no one can be left alive. Don't worry, boss. You are still worried about us doing things. The leader waved his hand and started to sneak into the mansion with dozens of well-trained top mercenaries. Obadiah nodded and followed slowly. These mercenaries are the world's top mercenaries. Don't look at the dozens of them. They can take down a small military base with tacit cooperation. He spent a lot of money to support them every year. It is to deal with things like this. Sure enough, the bodyguards protecting the mansion were no match for his mercenaries and were quickly cleared out. But when they invaded the interior of the mansion, they encountered trouble. In the hall, a wild man with a very strong body and a big beard blocked their way. I say, trespassing is not a good habit. Wolverine held a glass of wine and looked at the fully armed mercenaries opposite calmly. Who are you? Where's Tony? Tell him to stop hiding and come out. He can't escape. Obadiah looked at the unfamiliar Wolverine with a look of disdain on his face. It's no wonder he was disdainful. Wolverine was wearing a big vest at the moment and didn't even have a gun. In Obadiah's eyes, he didn't pose any threat at all. Chapter 86. The Death of Obadiah. He went to his studio to wear iron clothes. You can wait here. Wolverine pointed to the stairs behind him. Obadiah narrowed his eyes and ordered directly. Kill him, then go downstairs and bring Tony up. Yes, boss. The leading mercenary raised his hand and shot Wolverine in the middle of his eyebrows. Bang! The bullet hit Wolverine's eyebrows accurately, but the next scene made everyone stunned. Because the bullet did not kill the man in front of him, it was squeezed out from his eyebrows. Fuck, young people nowadays really have no patience at all. Putting the wine in his hand on the table, Wolverine's claws on both hands quickly popped out, then crossed them in front of his chest, and rushed into the mercenaries directly under the rain of bullets. To catch a thief, first catch the leader. Seeing that Obadiah was the leader, he ignored the attacks of the mercenaries, jumped in front of Obadiah, raised his hand and stabbed him in the chest, and killed him with a quick, accurate, and ruthless blow. At this time, Tony also put on his iron suit, flew out from the studio below, and joined the battle. Oh no, there are gunshots. Coulson just drove to the door of the mansion and heard fierce gunshots from inside. He quickly drew his gun and got out of the car. You wait here for me, don't run around, I'll go in and take a look. After telling Pepper and George, he rushed into the mansion as fast as he could. Tony. Pepper looked at the bodyguards lying in a pool of blood at the door, and a look of fear immediately appeared on her face. Then she turned her head and looked at George. Mr. George, please save Tony. She knew that the enemy could break through the defense of the mansion, and it must not be something Coulson could handle alone. Only George, the magical magician who could make bullets bend, had the ability to save Tony. Don't worry, Tony is not the weak playboy he was back then. However, there was no worry on George's face. Pepper didn't know that Tony had created the Mark suit. With the power of the Mark suit, ordinary people could never be Tony's opponent. In addition, Tony was accompanied by Wolverine in his prime. Sure enough, after passing the bodies of many security guards and entering the living room of the mansion, they saw Tony in his iron suit intact and Coulson stunned. He didn't see Wolverine, so he knew he must have hidden temporarily. It turned out to be Obadiah. It seems that it was really because of this guy. George found the body of Obadiah in the living room, which was obviously pierced through the chest by the steel claws. In connection with the Hydra attack that happened today, George had a rough idea in his mind. You are back. There was a little accident, but I solved it all. Tony took off his helmet, revealing his appearance, and said calmly. Tony, you are okay. Pepper rushed over excitedly with tears in her eyes. She was really scared to death after seeing the bodies along the way. Tony was hugged by Pepper, and was stunned for a moment, and then a special smile appeared on his face. To be honest, the person he trusted most in this world was Pepper, and only Pepper would really care about his safety. After experiencing life and death, he also has some special feelings for Pepper, maybe they can go further. Oh, I just don't want to find a new job. Pepper, who has regained his composure, stepped back and handed the USB drive to Tony. Here is the evidence of all Obadiah's crimes, as well as the video of his transaction with the terrorists who kidnapped you, but it may not be used now. By the way, this is the Agent Coulson I mentioned. Hello, Agent Callison, look, I am acting in self-defense. Tony took the USB drive, pointed at the dead Obadiah, turned his head and greeted Callison. Then he looked at George again, and George winked at him, and he immediately understood, without greeting George specifically. Of course, Mr. Stark, what are you wearing? Callison looked at the mark suit on Tony, his face full of curiosity. Tony, such a playboy, actually relied on this set of iron suits on his body to kill so many top mercenaries who could easily kill the guards of the mansion. It is incredible. This shows how terrifying the iron suit he wears is. It is definitely an epoch-making killing weapon. Oh, you mean this? This is my latest high-tech prosthesis. Tony pointed to the iron suit on his body, and then replied seriously. Callison was stunned when he heard this. Are you sure it's just a high-tech prosthesis? What about these people? Yes, it is a high-tech prosthesis that makes it easier for me to move. As for these people, of course I beat them down. Don't you know that I have learned Wing Chun? Tony took the lead and walked out of the living room. Okay, it's not important. Let's go out and find a place without blood and talk about what your strategic bureau does, and what it has to do with my father. It's the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. Callison followed Tony out. Don't you think your name is too long and difficult to pronounce? It's quite long. You can call us SHIELD. This name is much smoother. George motioned for Pepper to follow him out, and he went to Iron Man's studio downstairs. Sure enough, he saw Wolverine drinking here. What happened? This is what happened. Wolverine told George what happened after he left. Just when the battle was about to end, I found you guys were almost at the door. In order to prevent my identity from being exposed, I hid. You did a good job. That Callison is an old agent. He must be able to recognize your identity. At this stage, it is better for us not to be exposed to the eyes of the government. George nodded, then took Wolverine upstairs and flew directly from the top of the mansion, sending him to an X-fighter hidden in the air, and then returned to the living room. Zombie floating. Clean it up. Waving his hand to move all the corpses together, he used the desk-alling spell to clean the living room, and after confirming that the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents behind would not find any traces of Wolverine, he pretended to be a bodyguard and stood at the door. About half an hour later, Tony and the other two returned to the living room. You clean really fast. Looking at the clean living room, Callison looked at George with a somewhat different look in his eyes. It took just over half an hour to clean the blood-stained living room so clean. This guy's business ability is definitely top-notch. Did he guess wrong? But even if he is a top security guard, it is impossible for him not to find relevant information. Or does this guy have some other special identity? Will it be related to the third-party force that the director said rescued Tony? Since my father once belonged to S.H.I.E.L.D., then the rest of the matter will be left to you. Tony handed the USB flash drive in his hand to Callison and changed the subject. Callison did not think about it anymore, and said sincerely. Don't worry, Mr. Stark, we will handle the rest of the matter. In a few days, you just need to hold a press conference and announce that Obadiah died in a plane accident tonight. Chapter 87. Charming Lady Natalie. When Callison went to call to report the situation here, Tony went to the studio to take off his steel suit and asked George. When do we act? If possible, take action tomorrow. Since you have decided to take the initiative, the sooner the better. Okay, I'll add some new weapons to the suit tonight just in time. Tony nodded. The press conference would be held for a few days, and he was free these 2 days. He also just saw Wolverine fighting with his wolf claws. He thought it was very good and planned to get a pair of alloy steel claws on his suit at night so that he could extend them to assist in close combat. By the way, you can add some nerve-paralyzing current attack modules to deal with mutants like Wolverine who are ineffective with ordinary weapons. On the other side, after making the phone call to report the situation, Callison sorted out his pistol and spare magazines. However, this sorting out made him stunned, because he found a very unreasonable place. That is, there is not a single bullet missing in his magazine, and none of the spare magazines are used. What's going on? You have to say that here in the mansion, it is reasonable to say that not a single shot was fired and there was no shortage of bullets, but before that, he had single-handedly defeated so many enemies. As a senior agent, his intuition told him that there must be something wrong with the previous battle. Returning to the mansion, Carlson found that George was no longer there. In order not to alert others, he did not ask any more questions and planned to investigate after he returned. The next day, the X-Fighter once again became invisible and hovered over Tony's mansion. But this time, in addition to Wolverine, George also brought Caliban. He guessed that there must be newly cloned mutants in Rice's headquarters base. With Caliban, he could at least know the number of cloned mutants before attacking so that he could be mentally prepared. Such an old fighter plane actually has such performance and is also designed with a cloaking device. It seems that there was a guy in your X-Men with good skills back then. Tony flew into the fighter plane wearing a steel suit, took off his helmet, and looked around the fighter plane, with a look of admiration on his face. The guy who could invent such an advanced fighter jet in that era was definitely a genius. No matter how strong they are, he doesn't have much admiration for superpowers like George and Wolverine, but for those who have made achievements in technology, he still has some sympathy in his heart. At the same time, he also thought about whether to add invisibility function when upgrading the suit in the future, but he was quickly rejected. Because if the invisibility function is added, what he does will not be like walking at night, and that is not his style. His name is Beast, and he is indeed a very smart guy. When Wolverine heard this, a trace of nostalgia appeared on his face. At this time, George came over, first briefly introduced Caliban, and then began to discuss combat strategies. I suspect that Rice may clone a copy of Magneto. Before you know the strength of the copy, you two should not take action to prevent being targeted. When the time comes, I will take the initiative and you will assist. Tony's steel suit and the adamantium alloy in Logan's body are too restrained by Magneto's ability. If there was a clone of Magneto, he would give priority to killing the clone of Magneto so that the two of them could show their strength. I also considered the problem you mentioned last night, so I added special non-metallic bullets to the suit to assist sniping from a long distance. Actually, I have a plan. Although he is helping, Tony is not a guy who likes to let others direct the battle, and he has his own ideas about the next battle. After listening to Tony's combat strategy, George did not refute, but only made some suggestions in certain aspects. Because Tony was not clear about some information, the combat strategy was flawed. He is a magician, not a strategist. Since Tony is good at making battle plans, and after hearing it, he felt that it was indeed better than his own battle plan, then he had no reason to refuse. As long as the goal can be achieved, he doesn't think it matters who makes the battle plan. He has no personal heroism, and he doesn't like to show off or pretend. If he does that, it must be intentional for a certain purpose. If you agree, then let's do it. By the way, you haven't told me where their headquarters is. Seeing that his plan was approved by George, Tony showed a proud look on his face. He was indeed the wise man in the team this time. But his expression froze in the next second. I don't know now. George smiled and spread his hands. What, we are about to set off, you tell me you don't know where the enemy is? Tony looked at George in disbelief. You're not kidding me, are you? I don't know now, but I will know soon. I have the ability to track the enemy's location. After George finished speaking, he walked to the co-pilot seat of the fighter plane, sat down, and began to cast the tracking spell. The direction appears. As the spell was completed, an arrow made of golden powder appeared in front of George. Following the instructions of the arrow, Isa began to adjust the direction of the X-Fighter and increased its speed to the fastest possible speed. Tony in the cabin looked at the golden arrow in front of George and couldn't help but sigh. Do you mutants all have so many superpowers? If he remembered correctly, in the information about mutants, generally a mutant would only awaken one ability, and two abilities were extremely rare. But he remembered that George had 5 or 6 abilities. He is an exception. Except for a guy who was sealed, this is the first time I have seen a mutant with so many abilities. Wolverine shrugged. Sometimes he wondered if Dr. Rice had integrated all the abilities of mutants that appeared in history into George's body. At the same time, a helicopter slowly landed over the rooftop of a large base at the northwest end of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Hello, beautiful Mrs. Natalie, I am Sander Rice of Ackley Genetics. You are more beautiful than the rumors. Sander Rice looked at the red-haired beauty with a nearly perfect figure who walked down from the helicopter, his eyes rarely lit up, and he immediately stepped forward to praise her in a gentlemanly manner. As the boss of Ackley Genetics, He had seen all kinds of beauties, but today this Mrs. Natalie really made him feel a little different. Her smile and frown seemed to have a special magic that made people want to conquer her. She was definitely the most beautiful woman. Especially her identity as a woman, which made her different from ordinary vase women. The woman's name was Natalie Vodianova. Her husband Oakley was one of the largest suppliers of raw materials for her genetic company, but he died unexpectedly a month ago. And this Mrs. Natalie, relying on extraordinary means, actually took all of her husband's property into her own hands. The key point was that Natalie and Oakley had been married for less than a week. Chapter 88. Launching the attack. Many people suspected that the lady approached Oakley just to seize his huge fortune, and he was no exception. But that didn't matter. He admired such a woman. Roses with thorns will only hurt those useless people. A man like him who is destined to rule the world likes roses with thorns the most, especially his identity as a widow, which makes him feel particularly conquered. Of course, appreciation is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that the lady now has the raw materials he urgently needs. If he wants to copy and clone mutants in large quantities and form a mutant army to conquer the world, he must convince the lady to continue to cooperate with him like her husband and provide him with raw materials for cloning mutants. Mr. Rice, you are sweet, but if your project cannot satisfy me, I will not continue to provide you with raw materials at a low price like my husband. Natalie walked in front of Rice, stretched out her hand and gently tapped his chest, then smiled and drew a circle, and then walked past Rice and continued to move forward. Let's go, take me to see your project. I guarantee you'll be satisfied. Repressing the desire in his heart, Rice quickly turned around and walked to Natalie's side. Madam, my project is definitely beyond your imagination, as long as you cooperate with me. Clone mutants, and completely obey your orders, Mr. Rice, don't lie to me, I want to see the real results. Listening to Sander Rice's introduction of his project, Black Widow's heart tightened, but she still didn't reveal any flaws on the surface. Yes, Natalie was just a fake identity he disguised to get close to Sander Rice. Her real identity was Black Widow, a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. The purpose of entering the base this time was to find out whether Sander Rice was really studying mutant genes and to what extent, and to copy a copy of the research results and take it back. Half an hour later, in the center of the experimental base, Rice pointed to the 100 mutant clones in the nutrition cabin below and introduced them to Black Widow. Madam, look at these guys, they are all once famous mutants, and they will soon become the most expensive and powerful war weapons in the world. All countries and forces will willingly spend a lot of money to buy these weapons from me. I will become the world's largest weapons dealer, even the previous Stark group will be trampled under my feet. It was his previous plan to make mutant clones and sell them to other forces, but now he has already changed his plan. He wants to conquer the world with these mutant clones. But he is not a fool. It is impossible for him to tell this final plan to Natalie, who he just met, even though he is very interested in this lady. He just needs to let Natalie know that cooperating with him will make a profit in the future, and get a lot of raw materials first. If Natalie agrees, it's fine. If she doesn't agree, he will just use a few more clones of Professor X to brainwash her. In fact, this was his original plan, to trick this lady into the base, and use psychic power to brainwash her to provide him with a large amount of raw materials, but Natalie was too charming, and he wanted to see if he could conquer this woman by himself. This way he would feel very accomplished. I didn't expect Mr. Rice to be so talented. I like talented men. The Black Widow turned her head and flirted with Rice, who immediately stood up and straightened his white coat. So, madam, are you willing or not? Mr. Rice, you and my husband are good friends, but he is like a lighter to me. The Black Widow did not immediately agree to Rice, but smiled and took out a lighter from her pocket and lit a lady's cigarette for herself. Rice asked with some doubts. Why is he like a lighter? The Black Widow lit the lighter and placed it in front of Rice, took a puff of smoke and blew it over. It will catch fire with a little touch, and it will go out with a blow. It will go out with a blow. Dr. Rice looked at the flaming red lips of the Black Widow, and his body instantly became hot. Mine is absolutely inextinguishable, and it is beyond your imagination. Oh, if that's the case, then I am very willing to complete this cooperation with Mr. Rice. The Black Widow looked him up and down, and a look of contempt appeared on her face to better stimulate the other party's desire to conquer. I'm hungry, let's have lunch first. It's not easy to do it during the day, she needs to delay until the evening, and when she is alone with Rice at night, she can interrogate the relevant information, get all the research results, and then drive the helicopter she came in to escape, and her mission will be completed. Of course, let's eat, and have a good chat in the evening. Rice has decided to use the best medicine at night to let the other party know what is the flame that never goes out. As a top expert in genetic research, it is still possible to clone mutants and make his physique surpass ordinary people in a short period of time. Although there will definitely be some side effects after taking the medicine, for the sake of a man's dignity, it seems nothing. After lunch, with her charm, Black Widow has made Rice even more unable to stop. In the afternoon, under the pretext of visiting the project, she asked Rice to accompany her to visit most of the base, mastered the best escape route, and obtained a lot of useful information. For example, Rice once used a Mexican woman as a surrogate for mutant genes to give birth to new mutants, but failed because those children could not be controlled, and a group of people escaped and have not been caught yet. Just when Black Widow and Rice were about to visit the entire base, an invisible fighter plane also came over the base. It seems to be here. George stopped using the tracking spell and looked at the Institute with Leukemia Research and Treatment Center written below, knowing that he should have found the right place. Caliban, sense how many mutants are there in this institute. A total of 101. Caliban used his ability and soon got the result. This guy, he actually created so many mutants in such a short time. George did not expect that Sandor Rice was so capable. Even if they were clones, even if they could not reach their original strength, 100 mutants would definitely not be easy to deal with. Now he can only be thankful that he took the initiative to launch this attack, otherwise, if it was a little later, he might have to face the pursuit of 1,000 or 10,000 mutant clones. Then let's start the action as planned. With George's order, the cabin door of the X-Fighter opened, and Wolverine stretched out his adamantium claws and jumped down. He landed right at the gate of the base, and shouted arrogantly, "Xander Rice, come out and die!" The huge roar immediately attracted the attention of all the guards, and then there was a big fight. Chapter 89. Magneto Clone. Tony's battle plan was not complicated. Wolverine would expose himself and launch an attack, attracting firepower openly. After all, Wolverine was almost immortal, and ordinary people were no match for him. If the mutants were dispatched, ordinary mutant clones could not beat Wolverine. If they encountered Magneto's clones, Tony would shoot them with non-metallic bullets from a high altitude. One of them fought on the ground in close combat, and the other fought from a high altitude. At this time, while all the attention of the base was attracted by the two, George, who had the most and strongest abilities, sneaked into the base quietly, killed Sandor Rice first, destroyed the research materials, and then came out to help the two fight. Even if they retreated without a fight in the end, as long as Sandor Rice was killed and all the research materials were destroyed, then this operation would be considered a success. George approved of this battle plan. 101 mutants with different abilities, with their abilities cooperating with each other, and with the assistance of the guards guarding the base, it was not wise to attack head-on. As long as he can catch Sandor Rice, he can use his psychic ability and legilimency to read his memory, find and destroy all the research data, and there will be no trouble like Rice number 2. He didn't think of using those research data to create a batch of cloned mutants in the future. On the one hand, those cloned mutants basically have no thoughts of their own, and all rely on computers for control. If he encounters enemies like Ultron in the future, or some hacker masters, they may be seized and become his enemies before the fight begins. On the other hand, it is not easy to develop and manufacture cloned mutants. Even if he has all the research data, he still has to build a decent research base. Since he has a research base, he must be responsible for time and energy, otherwise it is easy for other forces to steal the fruits of his labor. And with that energy, it is better to improve his magic. His goal today is to completely solve the trouble of Rice, kill all mutant clones, and destroy all related technologies in public. In secret, he will still keep a copy of the information in case it is used at other times in the future. For example, if he needs a wand core, he can clone some hair of Phoenix Girl. Even if it is not the original hair, the clone should have some effect, which may be better than the professor's hair. Inside the experimental base. "Boss, Wolverine Logan is coming in." Commander Donald ran over in a panic, and Leigh frowned. "What's there to panic about? A mere Wolverine, what's there to be afraid of?" Wolverine Logan could find this place and take the initiative to attack them, which really surprised him. But a mere dusk wolf, a guy who can only recover some strength by taking medicine, what's there to be afraid of? Besides, now the beauty is right next to him, which makes people look down on him. No, boss, look for yourself. Commander Donald handed a tablet to Lei. Lei looked at the picture in the tablet and his pupils shrank. He actually recovered. It turned out that the tablet was connected to the base's monitoring system, and at this time, the young Wolverine in the tablet was fighting with the guards of the base. It was called a battle, but in fact it was almost a one-sided massacre. There was no guard who could stop Wolverine at his peak. Modern firearms are useless to Wolverine. Once he gets close to him, he will be shot dead. Even if he uses weapons like rocket launchers, at most he will just let Wolverine lie on the ground for a while. The key is that he can't hit him every time. If the guards don't fear life and death, it may cause some trouble to Wolverine. But the guards are also human. When they encounter an unkillable existence like Wolverine, it won't take long for their mentality to collapse, which makes the defense line collapse at a very fast speed. That's why Donald is so panicked. If he doesn't take measures, Wolverine will kill them. Mr. Rice, it seems that your base is in trouble. Will it involve me? Black Widow looked like a little girl who was afraid. In fact, she was thinking that since the base was attacked, maybe she didn't have to wait until night. She could get the research data of the base in the chaos. Rice was confident when he heard this. Madam, please rest assured. It's just a Wolverine. You can go to my room to rest first. I will come to you to discuss cooperation after I deal with this small problem. Then I'll wait for you in the room. Black Widow stuck out her tongue and licked her lips, then followed the guard to Dr. Rice's room. After Black Widow left, Rice's expression immediately became fierce. What a guy who is looking for death. He actually took the initiative to deliver himself to the door. Then today I will let you taste what it means to live a life worse than death. Turning around and walking quickly to the first mutant clone culture room, he ordered the staff there. Start the Magneto clone for me. With Rice's order, 9 of the 100 culture chambers below were immediately opened. 9 identical young versions of Magneto walked out of the culture chamber and went to meet Wolverine according to the instructions issued by the computer. When he chose to clone mutants, he did not clone only one of each mutant, but prioritized cloning mutants with stronger strength. For example, among the 100 mutant clones below, 10 are Black Emperor, 10 are Professor X, 10 are Phoenix, and 10 are Magneto. The rest, like Wolverine, Sabretooth, Red Devil, White Queen, Colossus, Cyclops, and Storm, are 2 or 3. Because the strength of these clones is far inferior to the original body, the strongest can barely reach the strength of the third-level mutant, so they need various abilities to cooperate with each other to launch an attack. The magnetic control of Magneto's clones is only a few hundred kilograms, but 9 Magneto clones attack together, which can definitely make Wolverine be fixed to death without any ability to fight back. And the fact is indeed as he expected. After the 9 Magneto clones arrived at the battlefield, the one-sided battle immediately reversed. Through the monitoring of the tablet, it can be seen that the 9 Magneto clones cooperated to launch magnetic force at the same time, and Wolverine was directly pressed against the wall. Then the steel bars in the wall were pulled out and inserted into Wolverine's body to fix it firmly. As for why Rice was able to get the mutant genes of Black Emperor and Red Devil, he also had to thank General William Stryker, to whom his father once served. After the first battle of mutants, the body of Black Emperor was taken away by the CIA and then taken by Bolivar Trask. Later, in order to create Sentinels, Trask killed a group of mutants including Red Devil and obtained most of the mutant genes. After the White House incident in 1973, Trask was sentenced to life imprisonment by the U.S. government for espionage. William Stryker, who was a liaison of the U.S. Department of Defense stationed at Trask Industries, obtained all of Trask's mutant genetic information and began to form his own team to independently study mutant genes. Later, William Stryker was defeated by the X-Men, so he took away all of his information, started the mutant extermination plan, and cultivated new mutants. Except for Apocalypse, who was directly turned into powder by Phoenix at that time, he did not obtain the genes. Most of the remaining mutant genes with names are in his database and can be cloned. Chapter 90, One vs Many. Shit, there really is a clone of Eric. Wolverine endured the pain of steel bars piercing his body and shouted out the window. Boy, Why don't you do it? Jacket Wolf, don't worry, I'll save you right away. At this time, in the sky outside the window, a special muzzle popped out from Iron Man's back. After Jarvis locked the positions of the 9 Magneto clones in the mask, 9 non-metal bullets were fired at the same time. Perfect. 9 bullets hit the heads of the 9 Magneto clones accurately, killing them on the spot. After all, clones are clones. Maybe they can strengthen the control of magnetism when combined together, but each of them is still less than a third-level mutant. If Magneto's body is here, even if Iron Man hides so far in the sky, he can still control it, and will not give Iron Man the opportunity to fire non-metal bullets. Even if he is really attacked, he can immediately use magnetism to gather steel in front of him. It's like the combined strength of 9 children, maybe they can match a strongman, but if 9 children want to fight a strongman, they have no chance of winning. How could this happen? What is that guy? Seeing the 9 clones of Magneto being shot and killed on the tablet at the same time, a robot-like thing entered the base from the window and helped Wolverine untie the steel bars. Lei was also a little confused. But he thought about it and felt relieved. Yes, no matter how powerful Wolverine is, he would not be stupid enough to break into their base alone. There must be extra helpers, maybe the experimental subject number 757 is also there. Except for clone number 101, all other mutant clones are activated, and then one is left in each category, and the rest go out to kill Wolverine, experimental subject number 757 and the robot together. Just as the mutant clones stood up from the nutrition cabin and quickly ran towards the location of Wolverine and Iron Man, George also sneaked in from the back of the base. Footprints revealed. All frozen. Alaho open. All petrified. After entering the base, George used the second tracking spell. Compared to the previous tracking spell that could only show the direction, this tracking spell can already show the opponent's footprints, and accurately track the target's location through the footprints on the ground. When he encountered a place with surveillance, he used the freezing spell to temporarily freeze the surveillance screen. When he encountered a high-tech password fingerprint door, he used the unlocking spell to open it. When he encountered the guards of the base, he would use the binding spell to freeze his whole body, and then control the blade to cut the throat and kill, leaving no one alive. It can be said that the whole way was basically unobstructed. Without the other party noticing, he soon came to a hall larger than the warehouse, and saw Sander Rice and Donald standing on the high platform above the hall. Bang! Raised his hand and fired a gun, the bullet drew an arc and hit Donald's head accurately. He needed to read Rice's memory to obtain all the research data, so Rice could not be killed for the time being, so he killed Commander Donald first. Poor Donald was still thinking about when to bring the mutant clone army to seek revenge on George and his friends, but he was shot by George before he even met them. "Hello, Dr. Rice." George smiled and greeted Rice after spreading his wings and flying to the platform. "Yes, how do you have the ability of an angel?" When Rice saw Donald being shot in the head, he was so scared that he immediately retreated behind the guards around him. Of course, he recognized the experimental subject number 757, and he also knew that this guy was good at using magnetism to control the trajectory of bullets to attack, but he didn't remember that he had added the mutant gene of angels to this guy's body. "Kill him for me." Without waiting for George to answer, Rice gave the order to kill. At this moment, he felt that the answer was not important. After killing the experimental subject number 757 and studying his body, he would naturally know what was going on. He always felt that the experimental subject number 757 was very wrong. During this period, he also used the genes of Magneto and Professor X to synthesize mutants like the experimental subject number 757 again. But those experimental subjects had no brains at all, and their abilities were not as strong as those of the entity number 757, so they were all thrown into the crematorium in the end. The guards surrounding Rice quickly drew their guns and attacked George, but George was faster. In the process of killing Donald and flying to the rooftop, he had already controlled several sharp blades to go around behind the guards, and the moment they drew their guns, the blades also launched an attack. Squeak! 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 Blood spurted from the neck, and the guards who protected Rice all fell to the ground with blood spurting out. However, at this moment, two thin red lights shot over from the lower right, directly hitting George's head. The psychic ability warning plus the cat's reaction ability allowed George to easily dodge the sneak attack of the two red lights with an iron bridge, and then he turned his head to look to the lower right. You are quite alert. You actually left some behind. At this moment, a group of naked mutant clones stood to his right. They were the young versions of Magneto, Professor X, Phoenix, Storm, etc. that Rice had left behind just in case. The one who just attacked George was Cyclops, but compared to the red shockwave of the real Cyclops, this clone was much worse. Turning his head to look at Rice again, he had been teleported by the Red Devil to the back of the mutant clones below. Experimental Subject 757, you are just a second-level mutant with the genes of Magneto and Professor X. Basically, everyone here has the strength of a third-level mutant. Let's see how you die. After Rice was rescued by the Red Devil, he looked at the mutant clones he created, and the fear just now disappeared. Then come on. George remained calm after hearing this. The current situation was actually within his expectations. Tony's strategy of luring the tiger away from the mountain is certainly useful, but Rice is not a fool, and he will definitely leave some mutant clones to protect himself. In the end, there will be a battle. But he is very confident about this battle. Because Rice's understanding of him is limited to the second-level magnetism and psychic ability, and he basically knows the abilities of most mutants. Especially the attack from Cyclops just now, which made him understand that the strength of these mutant clones is indeed as weak as he expected. Smoke screen. Raising his hand, he cast a smoke screen spell, and the whole hall was covered with smoke. George fired a gun, and the bullet went straight to the position where the Red Devil was. First, he had to deal with this one who could teleport, to prevent Lei from being teleported away, and he would have to look for him again, wasting time. Because they didn't expect George to release smoke, the mutant clones had no time to react, and the Red Devil fell to the ground. Chapter 91. Wind. But soon Storm's clone used its own ability to blow away all the smoke with wind, and all mutant clones that could attack remotely used their own abilities to attack. Cyclops' laser, Magneto's control of iron, Phoenix's mind to move heavy objects, Fireman's flames, Iceman's freezing, etc. However, with George's physical fitness and reaction nerves, these attacks were basically easily dodged by him. While dodging, he kept shooting and killed several mutants. But this situation did not last long, because Professor X, Phoenix, and the White Queen's 3 clones joined forces to exert mind control on George at the same time. George himself has psychic abilities, and he also has the bonus of wizard blood, so he is not afraid of being really controlled by the 3 clones. But it is not without impact, at least he can no longer concentrate and dodge attacks flexibly like before. Armor protection. Seeing those attacks coming again, George stretched out his left hand and released the iron armor spell, and a magic energy shield appeared instantly, blocking all long-range attacks for him. The defensive strength of the armor spell is still very powerful. However, when he was about to shoot again, he found that his gun began to be out of control. It was obvious that the clone of Magneto gave up controlling the iron attack and started to compete with him for the magnetic control of the pistol. At this time, other melee mutant clones, such as Wolverine, Sabretooth, Colossus, and Psylocke, also rushed to the platform, intending to fight him in close combat. Capture him alive. Rice thought that the current experimental subject number 757 had no chance of winning, and immediately ordered those melee mutant clones. Originally, he wanted to kill the experimental subject number 757, and then study his body to see what happened, whether there were any other mutations, or injected with other genes. But now he found that the superpowers of the experimental subject number 757 were getting more and more, some of which were beyond his imagination, so he wanted to capture him alive first to see if he could torture him out of any information, and then conduct experimental research. If the mutants he created in the future were as powerful as the experimental subject number 757, he would rule the world faster. It's an eyesore. Looking at the naked mutant clones rushing towards him, George couldn't help but twitch his lips. The female clones were fine, but the male clones were swinging when they were running, which was really hard to hold. It felt that the damage caused by this mental shock had exceeded the mental control of Professor X and the other 2 below. While continuing to maintain the armor spell to block long-range attacks and manipulate magnetism to compete with Magneto for control of magnetism, he freed his right hand and took out the alloy mace from the pocket with the traceless extension spell. Change. As a magic circle appeared on George's body, his body expanded rapidly, and in the blink of an eye he turned into a giant nearly 4 meters tall. At this time, he was using the giant magic of President Makarov. Although he couldn't change to a height of several hundred meters like President Makarov, it was not difficult to get started with a height of 3 or 4 meters. The first one. George raised the mace in his hand and, like playing whack-a-mole, smashed the fastest Quicksilver clone to the ground, bloody and dead. Quicksilver's clone was very fast, and only a faint after-image could be seen when running, but it was still more than one level behind the original body. With the overall improvement of physical fitness, George successfully hit the opponent with the huge mace. The improvement of giant magic is an all-round improvement, not only in size, but also in strength, speed, defense, and reaction nerves. In addition, his body is different from that of ordinary people. The wizard blood allows wizards to have the ability to resist and recover beyond ordinary people. The physical fitness of mutants is usually better than that of ordinary people. The nerve reaction speed and dynamic ability of magic cats are extraordinary. The superposition of the three, and the amplification of giant magic, even in close combat, he is definitely a first-class existence. If there are more clones in the future, with the superposition of clones' physiques, this advantage will continue to be magnified. After killing the Quicksilver clone, George did not stop with the mace in his hand, and then swept away all the remaining people. He did not know any fighting skills, nor could he use all kinds of weapons well. His main strength and speed were his strength. He chose the mace because it was simple to use and had good lethality. If those mutant clones that were swept away by him were ordinary people, they would definitely die with just this one blow. However, even if these mutant clones have the ability to heal themselves, can be hardened and beast-like, they still cannot get up immediately because they are not as good as the original body. Even those like the Psylocke clones who focus on attack but are weak in defense were killed directly. At this time, George did not pursue the victory, but used the wing magic again, and wings grew on his back, and flew directly to the mutant clones that were still attacking from a distance, against the defense of the armor spell. He smashed them randomly when he landed. The first to bear the brunt was the clone of Magneto, who was competing with George for control of magnetism. Because the magnetism was suppressed by George and could not affect the alloy mace, his head was smashed into his stomach. Without the obstruction of the clone of Magneto, George regained control of magnetism, and several sharp blades immediately flew out of his sleeves and joined the killing. The mutants responsible for long-range attacks were rapidly reduced in number, and the power of long-range attacks was greatly reduced. He simply gave up the armor spell defense and launched an all-out attack. Magic, melee and superpowers, all three aspects were used together. Even those melee mutant clones who came back to support were suppressed by him in all directions. The whole body binding spell and the coma spell controlled the body, and the mace and blades killed him. Occasionally, there were weakened laser shots like Cyclops hitting him, but they were all blocked by the powerful defense after the giantization. Seeing that the mutant clones were getting fewer and fewer, Lei panicked. He ordered the mutant clones guarding him. "You go and help too." Then he quickly ran to the control room of the incubator, where his last trump card was, clone number 101. He only cloned one and planned to destroy it, but he didn't expect it to become his life-saving straw now. Seeing that Rice was about to escape, George used his mace to sweep away the Wolverine and Sabretooth clones, who had the ability to heal and were more difficult to deal with, and raised his hand to shoot a full-body binding spell at Rice. "Petrify all!" The blue magic light shot out, but was blocked by a strange mutant clone. The key is that after blocking George's full-body binding spell, the mutant was not fixed, but rushed towards George with a grin. George subconsciously smashed the mace, but when the mace hit the mutant, it seemed to absorb all the kinetic energy at once and did not cause any damage. Instead, an equally strong force rebounded from the mace, making him almost lose the mace. The clone of Black Emperor Sebastian Shaw. George raised his eyebrows and immediately knew what was going on. Confuse the audience. The next second, the confusing spell was activated, and the eyes of the Black Emperor clone were confused and unable to activate their abilities. The sharp blade cut its throat and killed it on the spot. Chapter 92. Tracking the Black Widow. The Black King is definitely an extremely powerful mutant. Even if it is a clone, it cannot be compared to ordinary mutant clones. He has the ability to absorb various forms of energy, and can convert and release the absorbed energy into very powerful attacks. Whether it is technological bombs, missiles, or even nuclear bombs, physical melee damage, or magic and energy attacks, he can absorb them all. But he is not without his weaknesses, which is being restrained by psychic abilities. It was in order to overcome this weakness that he built a helmet that could defend against mind control, and it later became Magneto's iconic helmet. Without this helmet, he would not be able to resist at all when facing Professor X. But if he had a helmet, there weren't many people in the world who could kill him. The Black King clone here does not have a helmet, and although George's psychic ability is not enough to immobilize the opponent, and he does not know the mind control black magic such as the Imperious Curse, he can confuse the spell. Confusion spells can make people feel trance-like and are also mind control magic. In fact, he felt that the absorption capacity of the Black Emperor clone was definitely far different from that of the real Black Emperor. As long as he smashed the mace a few more times, he probably wouldn't be able to withstand it all. But that would be a waste of time, and it would be easier without the confusion charm. Collapse. Another spell was fired at Rice, but this time it failed again because the younger version of Professor X's clone was in the way. Of course, the clone of Professor X was unable to absorb the power of magic and fainted. George, who originally wanted to kill him, suddenly thought of something, and with a thought, he grabbed the unconscious clone of Professor. If he remembered correctly, Professor X had the ability to transfer consciousness. After being killed by Phoenix Girl, his consciousness was transferred to his twin brother who was in a vegetative state. Logically speaking, this younger version of Professor X's clone should be able to transfer consciousness more easily than his twin brother. Although after the transfer, due to physical limitations, he may never reach the level of a 4th level mutant, at least he has a young and healthy body and no longer needs to sit in a wheelchair. It can better help him manage the super schools that may exist in the future. Collapse. The third time he cast his magic, another mutant clone stood in front of him. The controller inside the mutant clone body has the highest order set by Rice, which is to protect his safety. So when he is in danger, these mutant clones will go to him one after another to resist harm. Even if they die, they will not blink an eye. They are his most loyal subordinates. I didn't expect you to have so many abilities, but it's useless. Then you will become an ordinary person. I will study your body and create countless clones as powerful as you to conquer the world for me. Because the mutant clones were dying one after another, Rice finally came to the console of the nutrition cabin and pressed a button. George's power was something he never expected, which both frightened and excited him. You want me to become an ordinary person? How naive! George smashed the Phoenix female clone in front of him into meat patties, then cut off the Phoenix female clone's hair with a blade and put it in his pocket. The ready-made wand core material saves you from going back to research cloning, so you must not let it go. As for Rice's final trump card, he actually already had a guess in his mind. That trump card was very effective against other mutants, even the genuine Black King, Magneto, and Professor X, but it really had no effect on him. Sure enough, as Lei pressed the button, a special nutrition cabin slowly rose in the middle of the hall. As the nutrition cabin opened, a bald little boy appeared in his eyes. With the appearance of the little boy, George felt his magnetic control and psychic abilities disappear at the same time. A clone of a mutant leech. The boy is none other than a mutant with the ability to suppress other mutants. He himself has no offensive power, but as long as he is around him, the abilities of all mutants will be suppressed, even 4th and 5th level mutants. He can be called the nemesis of mutants. Of course, it is also called the antidote for mutants. After all, not all mutants like the superpowers they have awakened. Experimental subject number 757, I admit that you are powerful, but now, you are just an ordinary person. Seeing a small group of guards rushing towards the entrance of the hall, Lei felt like he was okay again. However, George directly threw the alloy mace at the newly appeared guards, killing most of them on the spot. If it worked for me, shouldn't I be back to my normal size by now? Damn it, I never use mutant superpowers, so naturally I won't be affected by them. George took out his alloy longsword and used a burst of magic output to freeze the remaining guards and mutant clones in place. Then he picked up the mace alloy stick and killed them all. He came to Lei, who was collapsed on the ground in fear. Before. Experimental subject number 757, we can actually work together to conquer the world. You know nothing about this world. George interrupts the pie that Lei painted, dispels the giant's magic, and puts the ring back on. Legilimency. Just with these mutant clones, do you still want to conquer the world? Let's not talk about others, let Iron Man study it, maybe he can use Jarvis to invade your control system and control these mutant clones. Mrs. Natalie, this guy is not the Black Widow, right? After a moment, George, who had read Rice's memory, couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The Mrs. Natalie in Rice's memory made it hard for him not to think of the super spy Black Widow of S.H.I.E.L.D. It seems that S.H.I.E.L.D. has also noticed that Rice is studying mutant genes. We can't let Black Widow get the research data. George stood up and controlled the grenades on the guards' waists to explode together, directly blowing up the entire hall, and then rushed directly to the data room where Rice stored the research data. If that Mrs. Natalie is really the Black Widow, then she must have taken advantage of the chaos to steal the research data at this moment. Once the mutant clone technology falls into the hands of the Black Widow, it will also fall into the hands of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, which is not something that a mere Rice can compare to. Not here, did you fail or did you succeed? At this moment, George was not in a hurry to find Mrs. Natalie. Instead, he backed up all the technical information of the Rice laboratory and destroyed the entire data room. After doing all this, he chanted the tracking spell. Footprints show. At this time, he was no longer thinking about Sandor Rice, but Natasha Romanoff, the real name of the Black Widow. A line of footprints appeared in front of him and spread out of the data room. Chapter 93. Feels good. On the rooftop of the base, the Black Widow, who had already changed into a black tight-fitting combat uniform, got on the helicopter parked on the rooftop and began to slowly take off. She has successfully obtained all the research materials, and now she is taking advantage of the chaos in the base to escape and bring these research materials back to S.H.I.E.L.D. Let Hawkeye lead the team to clean up later. She got too much information here today, not only Rice's cloned mutant weapons program, but also the rejuvenated Wolverine and a group of mutant children hiding in New York. However, just as she was operating the helicopter to take off, a figure with white wings on its back suddenly appeared in front of the helicopter. Flavie. George cast a transformation spell on the helicopter rotor bearing. Under the influence of the transformation spell, the mechanical bearing immediately turned into a large solid rock. The rotor immediately became stuck and stopped rotating, and the helicopter fell to the rooftop again. His transformation spell can't transform the entire helicopter, but it can still transform one of its parts. Precision machinery often only needs one part to render it incapable of working. He ran really fast. Before the helicopter completely crashed, Black Widow noticed something was wrong, jumped directly to the rooftop, and quickly escaped along the rooftop downwards. But for George, this didn't get rid of him. He accelerated and flew in front of the Black Widow and stopped her on the rooftop. Black Widow, the famous senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., please hand over those copied research materials. You are not from Lay, but a companion of Wolverine. Black Widow slightly raised the widow sting on her right hand. If you are a companion of Wolverine, then we are not enemies. Our goals are the same, and we all have the same plan to destroy Rice. From the constant explosions in the distance, it can be seen that the invasion of the base is not over yet. Rice is probably too busy to take care of herself. The chance of discovering that she copied the research data and sent someone to hunt her down is very small. The key is, even if she is really discovered, it is impossible to know her details so clearly. So the person in front of me with his wings spread out and using superpowers to crash the helicopter is most likely Wolverine's companion. Since our goals are the same, please hand over the research data. This technology of cloning mutants must be destroyed. Otherwise, even if Rice is eliminated this time, there will be others next time. George smiled and held out his hand. Black Widow shook her head. I can't decide this. My task is to bring these materials to the director and let him decide whether to destroy them. But please believe us at S.H.I.E.L.D., no matter what decision we make, the ultimate goal is to protect the world. If you don't believe it, you can go to S.H.I.E.L.D. with Wolverine. I believe the director will give you a satisfactory answer. It seems that you are unwilling to hand it over, so I have to do it myself. George was too lazy to talk nonsense and raised his hand to cast a coma spell. Collapse. However, Black Widow is not comparable to ordinary soldiers. She has rich combat experience and her body was modified during training in the Red Room. She is far superior to ordinary agents in all aspects. The moment she saw George raising his hand, she made a tactical dodge, dodged the magic light directed at her, and shot out the miniature electric shock device in the widow's stoma with a current of up to 30,000 volts. The response was quick, but it was useless. Seeing the Black Widow dodge her magic and launch a counterattack, George raised the corner of his mouth slightly, activated his superpower, and directly controlled the incoming micro-electric shock device to shoot back. There is metal in the micro-electric shock device, so it will inevitably be controlled by its magnetism. Black Widow didn't expect that the attack she fired would be bounced back. Her expression immediately changed, and she used her super flexibility to bend down to avoid the rebounded micro-electric shock device. Unfortunately, this micro-electric shock device is not just as simple as rebounding, but is completely controlled by George's ability. Just as the miniature electric shock device was about to fly past, it suddenly fell completely against the rules of physics and quickly landed on the Black Widow's chest. 30,000 volts of high voltage erupted from the micro-electric shock device, and Black Widow was immediately electrocuted and twitched on the ground. "I told you to hand it over earlier, but you didn't listen. Now you must be punished by the boss." George came to the Black Widow, who was electrocuted and could not move for a while, smiled, shook his head, and began to fumble. Soon, he found a miniature USB flash drive in the inner hidden pocket of his tights under his chest. "Good shape and good feel." With a smile and a joke, he crushed the USB drive to pieces in front of Black Widow. Then he reached out and pointed at Black Widow, who was trying to restrain her body from twitching and trying to get up. "Everything is forgotten, the memory is modified." Yes, he's going to amnesize and modify Black Widow just like he did Coulson. In fact, he knew that the forgetting curse and the memory modifying curse were not flawless. If it were an ordinary person, there might not be any problems, but agents have undergone strict training and have very careful thinking. As long as you go back and think about it carefully, you will find that many things do not match up, and you will have doubts about your own experiences and memories. But this is not important to George, as long as there are no problems in a short period of time. Even if Coulson and Black Widow use S.H.I.E.L.D.'s methods to restore their memories later, it won't have much impact on him. Because after solving the problem of Lei, he will enter a new round of seclusion to study and improve his magic power, and he will hardly go out. If S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to find him, there is only one clue: Tony Stark. Let alone whether Tony cares about Nick Fury or not, even if Tony cares about him, Tony himself does not know where George and others are hiding in New York, he only knows that they are in New York. George did not tell Tony that they are hiding in the mutant school. Die. Use the coma spell to knock Black Widow unconscious, and carry her to fly quickly to the battlefield where Tony and others are. Those mutant clones will not stop fighting because of less death, just like X-24 in the movie will not stop chasing Dusk Wolf because of less death. They have controllers in their bodies that can be controlled, but if the controller dies, they will continue to fight according to the previous orders until they die. So now Tony and Wolverine are still fighting a large number of mutant clones. "George, come and help, I can't hold on any longer." As soon as George arrived at the battlefield, he heard Tony's loud cry for help. He looked at him with some surprise and said, "How could this happen?" He thought that with the strength of Tony and Wolverine, one close combat and the other long range, they should not be so embarrassed even if they couldn't beat those clones. Wolverine was suppressed and had no room to fight back, and Tony's battlesuit on one arm had been destroyed, and the battlesuit on his body was also in pieces. Obviously he was beaten badly. Chapter 94. Sigma George. What's wrong with you? George threw Black Widow to the ground and raised his hand to cast several stun spells to knock down the mutant clones that besieged Tony. Tony is different from Wolverine. Wolverine is almost immortal and can't die even if he is suppressed, but Tony relies on the Iron Man suit. If the Iron Man suit is blown up, he will be an ordinary person and will really die. You have to ask Jacket Wolf. He can't do it to his former comrades, especially that woman. Tony panted and pointed at the Phoenix clones in front of him and complained. It turns out that when dealing with the Black Emperor, the White Queen and the Red Devil, even the Sabretooth and his own clones, Wolverine can go all out, but he can't do it to those X-Men clones. Especially when facing the 9 Phoenix clones. Iron Man, don't call me Jacket Wolf. I can't do it to my former comrades, but you can't do it to all women. At this time, Wolverine also struggled to get rid of the Phoenix's entanglement and retreated to George and Tony. Tony reorganized his suit and replied as a matter of course. I like to fight them in bed, not beat them to a pulp here, that's too ungentlemanly. You deserve to be beaten like this. George rolled his eyes when he heard this. We can't waste any more time. With such a big commotion, the police will come soon. Repair it as before. He waved his hand and cast a repair spell to restore the broken steel suit to its original state. He ignored Tony, who almost doubted his life, and began to redistribute combat tasks. You are responsible for dealing with non-X-Men and male mutant clones, and leave the rest to me. In his eyes, there are only enemies and his own people, no distinction between men and women, and gentlemanly manners are something he only uses for his own people. As a Sigma man, even if the enemy is a woman, he will fight with all his strength to kill the other party to show respect. Transform. The giant magic was activated, and George turned into a giant of nearly 4 meters again. He picked up the mace and jumped to the group of Phoenix girls. A rotating windmill crushed most of the Phoenix girls. Then the coma spell, the whole body binding spell, the confusion spell and other spells were frequently shot out, and the magnetic blades were controlled like a harvester, and began to quickly clean up the mutant clones. In just a few minutes, many female mutant clones such as Phoenix Girl, Storm Girl, Mystique, Phantom Cat, and White Queen were all beaten to pieces by George. So perverted. Watching George's battle over there, Tony and Wolverine couldn't help but be stunned. On the one hand, they thought George was perverted for being so vicious to so many beauties, and on the other hand, they thought George's strength was even more perverted. Before, most of them only saw George's arc shooting and various tricks like magic. It was the first time for him to fight with all his strength like now. All the female mutant clones were killed by George. Without any scruples in their hearts, Tony and Logan also showed their true strength. Tony, whose battle suit was repaired, used a small tracking missile that could easily blow up a tank. The powerful explosion power made it impossible for the clones of the Black Emperor to fully absorb it, and they were directly blown to death on the spot. Logan did not defend at all and attacked with all his strength. No one could stop his sharp adamantium claws. After all, clones are clones. The strongest can only barely reach the threshold of level 3. If the number does not reach thousands or tens of thousands, it is really not a big threat. Is this beauty also a mutant clone? After getting rid of all the mutant clones, Tony walked over to the unconscious Black Widow, with a little surprise on his face. He has seen many top beauties, but there are also few with the appearance and figure like Black Widow. She is the Black Widow, an agent of SHIELD, don't worry about her, the police are coming, we should retreat. Hearing the sound of a large number of police sirens approaching here, George quickly picked up the bodies of mutant clones and threw them all into the burning Research Institute building behind, and then used the Descaling spell to remove all traces of blood. The purpose of doing this is to prevent some people from using the genes of these mutant clones to conduct other experiments. After dealing with all this, he returned to his normal size, spread his wings and took Wolverine and Iron Man directly back to the X-Fighter that had been hidden in the air. Not long after George and the other two left, a large number of Mexican police also drove police cars to the door of the Research Institute building that was burning wildly. I'm sorry, ma'am, you are arrested. We suspect that you are related to the murder and arson case of the Leukemia Institute. Please cooperate with our investigation. After waking up, the Black Widow listened to the words of the Mexican police in front of her and looked at the handcuffs on her wrists. She couldn't help but show a confused look, and then a memory emerged in her mind. In her memory, she successfully sneaked into the Institute as Mrs. Natalie, was discovered while stealing the Institute's information, and then fought with the Institute's guards. In order to escape, she set fire to the Institute, but was accidentally knocked unconscious by the explosion. The memory was so real, but she, who had an extraordinary logical thinking, noticed a lot of unreasonable things. Get rid of these police first. She leaned slightly to attract the police's attention with her proud career line, and knocked him down easily with an elbow. She took out the key from the policeman's pocket and unlocked the handcuffs. She kicked open the car door and jumped directly to the police car behind. The next step is to seize the car and run away, and then contact the headquarters to report the situation. On the other side, George and others also returned to Tony's mansion in Malibu in an X-Fighter and sent Tony back. After a battle, Tony's suit was running low on battery and was unable to fly back on his own. After sending Tony back, George and the others also returned to the mutant school. After returning, he immediately found the elderly Professor X and roughly explained the situation of the operation. Then he took out the younger version of Professor X's clone from his pocket. What about Professor, can it be transferred into this body? It can be transferred, but I don't really want to do it. Professor X sighed. I was supposed to die, and now I'm alive just to do something to help these kids. When his memory was restored, he had the idea of wanting to die. He did not die because the children in the school still needed a qualified teacher. After hearing Professor X's words, before George started to persuade him, Wolverine had already stepped forward and grabbed Professor. Charles, cheer me up. With a good body, you can teach your children better. With your current body, you feel sleepy after just a few classes. If you want to make up for it, living can make up for it better than dying. Death can only be an escape. You should know this better than me. Under Wolverine's persuasion, Professor X finally agreed to transfer his consciousness to the young clone. Chapter 95. Divine Sword Shadowless Curse. That night, Professor. However, as George expected, his psychic ability has been greatly weakened due to the limitations of the clone, but because of his strong consciousness, he still has the ability of a third-level mutant. Professor, I need you to use the brainwave amplifier to find some people for me during your spare time when teaching the children. Who are you looking for? Feeling his youthful body, Professor George explained. Find some kids with special abilities, and then we try to enroll them in our schools. He revealed his plan to change the mutant school into a super school. After Professor X listened, he thought for a long time before nodding heavily. You're right. Maybe when I proposed the concept of mutants, we were already separated from humans, and that's why there are so many things behind this. It's better to do this and remove the label of mutants, so that in the future children can truly integrate with humans. At this moment, he felt as if he had more responsibilities in his heart. Maybe his pattern should be bigger. Not only mutant children, but also children who have awakened superpowers actually face the same problems as mutant children. There are also adults with special abilities, and schools also need teachers. George thought for a moment and continued. Professor X hesitated for a moment. With my current ability, even if I have a brainwave amplifier, I can't search the entire world. The maximum range is probably not beyond New York, so the effect may not be as good as you think. It's okay, take your time and don't rush. George was not surprised. This step was originally a casual move and was not the focus of his work. Even if the professor only found one per year, it was not unacceptable. In the future, when he becomes stronger and the school becomes famous, he doesn't need to be approached by professors, and people will naturally come to him for help. After some exchanges with Professor X, George entered a state of focusing on learning magic and stopped caring about outside things. At the same time, Tony, who returned to the mansion, experienced the fun of fighting in a suit, improved his suit again, and started his own journey as a superhero. As long as there are terrorists anywhere in the news, he will appear in a steel suit and kill all the terrorists under the shining cameras of reporters. In just a few days, he became the world-famous Iron Man. The key is that he didn't listen to S.H.I.E.L.D., concealed his identity, and openly committed suicide at the press conference. Of course, these have no impact on George. He is still concentrating on learning and researching magic. Harry Potter World, Hogwarts. George was in a very good mood today, because Snape promised to officially teach several spells he invented, including the Shadowless Curse that he wanted to learn the most. In Dean Slytherin's office in the basement, Snape looked at George standing in front of him and said, George, you are the most talented student I have ever encountered in my teaching career. He is very good and I am very satisfied. As the head of Slytherin, he did not hesitate to praise George, the star of Slytherin. As a Slytherin student, George also replied in a very Slytherin way. Thank you, Dean, for your praise. I will continue to excel, lead Slytherin to become the leader of the four houses, and bring glory to Slytherin. Modesty seemed false at this time, and because of his understanding of Snape during this period, Snape should have liked what he just said more. Sure enough, after hearing George's answer, Snape had a rare smile on his face, although his smile was a bit uglier than crying. Yes, the glory always belongs to Slytherin, and I believe in you too. So I called you here this time to teach you some of my own magic spells. I wonder if you are willing to learn them? Dumbledore once talked to him and said that he should pay more attention to George. The child George was somewhat similar to Voldemort in some aspects, and he should be guided more to avoid going astray. He had actually been aware of Dumbledore's concerns for a long time. He couldn't see through some of George's cleverness, but he felt that there was nothing wrong with that. Slytherin should be like this, should he act like those reckless people in Gryffindor? As for George being like Voldemort, there was indeed some resemblance, but he felt that George was essentially more like him than like Voldemort. George's excellence, politeness, being loved by all teachers and students, and his thirst for magical knowledge are all very similar to Voldemort, and his life experience is equally tragic. However, as Voldemort's most trusted subordinate, he knew that Voldemort's thirst for magical knowledge did not come from his heart, but had a strong purpose and extreme thoughts. But George was different in this regard. After many remedial lessons, he felt that George's pursuit of magic was the same as when he was in school, more pure, that is, he purely wanted to learn magic and explore magic. More importantly, he found that George did not have any extreme ideas about his birth, but was instead very open-minded. Of course, people are good at disguise. Maybe George's disguise is hard for him to see through. As a natural legilimens, George can't detect anything even if he uses legilimens. Besides, it's not easy for him to use legilimens on his best student. So it is precisely because of this that he wants to teach George his own original magic, teach and guide George well, so that George will not go astray. Yes, very much. Hearing Snape's words, George nodded quickly without thinking. Only a fool would not want to. The Sharp Edge spell is one of the spells he wants to learn the most. It is silent when attacking, and it is basically difficult to dodge. The key is that it has the characteristics of a curse. Normal healing spells can't heal at all. A specific counter spell must be used to remove the curse and heal. If he can learn it, it can be said that it is his strongest offensive magic except for the giant magic. He estimated that even if Wolverine was hit by his Sharp Edge spell, he couldn't rely on the self-healing factor to recover from the wound. There is also the Fuchsia spell, which is different from the levitation spell and the relocation spell. If a normal wizard is hit by a spell with similar effects such as the levitation spell and the relocation spell, he can use the universal debunking spell to directly remove the spell for himself. However, if you are hit by the Fuchsia spell, unless you know the counter spell, you cannot use the universal debunking spell to remove it, and you need to wait until the magic effect ends before you can land again. Chapter 96. Who is the successor to the secret room? Okay, the school is not peaceful recently. I hope that after you learn these spells, you can use them to protect yourself and your Slytherin classmates. Snape looked serious, but George was a little confused. We are all Slytherin. Halfway through his words, he immediately stopped and changed his words with a smile. I know, I will protect my classmates and friends. Slytherin is either pure blood or mixed blood. It stands to reason that opening the Chamber of Secrets will not be dangerous to Slytherin's wizards, so Snape's words must have another meaning. After thinking about it for a moment, George roughly guessed the reason. Quite simply, Snape hoped that after George learned these spells, if he happened to encounter young wizards from other colleges, especially Harry, who was in danger, he could take action to play some role. Snape hated Harry very much because Harry looked like James, who bullied him back then. But he must protect Harry's safety, because Harry is his favorite Lily's child. Dumbledore would not tell Snape everything. In Snape's view, the Chamber of Secrets was opened at this time, and the monsters inside were very dangerous to the Muggle-born wizard and Harry. This is why he assists the disgusting Lockhart and teaches the young wizards how to duel. Although Snape is not as impartial as McGonagall, as a teacher at Hogwarts, he also has the heart to protect all students, including Muggle-born wizards. It's just that Snape would definitely not say anything like this. Snape knew that he, Harry, and Hermione were friends and often studied together. If he was in danger, he could learn the Shadowless Curse and be of great help. As the days passed, George spent most of his free time learning the Divine Edge Shadowless Curse and the Upside-Down Golden Bell Curse. Hogwarts has been quiet during this period, and there have been no more petrified incidents, because Voldemort's diary is now in Harry's hands. It was only on Sunday of the second week of school that the Harry trio brought the diary to find George, who was reading in the library again, and told him about the results of their communication with the diary last week. So you suspect that Hagrid is the descendant of the Chamber of Secrets and released the monsters inside? George asked somewhat amusedly. We have long known that Hagrid was expelled from school, and the attacks must have stopped since Hagrid was kicked out. Otherwise, Riddle would not have won the award. Harry's face was full of distress, and he was most reluctant to believe this answer, but the evidence pointed to Hagrid. Hagrid has always had a soft spot for all kinds of huge monsters. Last year, he even tried to feed the fire dragon in the cabin, as well as the three-headed Lu Wei who guarded the magic stone. We thought maybe he just didn't want the monster to be locked up all the time, and didn't expect the monster to kill people. Ron added. George looked at Hermione, who lowered her head. We actually don't believe it either, so I'm here to ask your opinion. I know that you often go to the cabin to find Hagrid. Well, to be honest with you, it can't be Hagrid. George said affirmatively. The three little ones' eyes immediately lit up when they heard this. Why? Because first of all, Slytherin is a wizard who values blood very much, and it is impossible for him to find a wizard with giant blood as his successor. Secondly, since Dumbledore trusts Hagrid, it means that Dumbledore does not believe that Hagrid did what happened back then. Finally, the diary cannot be what it says. Who knows if the scene he created is true? Maybe he himself is the heir, and he deliberately framed Hagrid. Who knows? George suggested unhurriedly. For this kind of thing, I suggest you ask Hagrid in person. Or if you are too embarrassed to ask, I can ask it for you. Although he hoped that the Chamber of Secrets incident would become a big deal, he did not want Hagrid to be implicated like in the original work and go to Azkaban for a few months. In a place like Azkaban, where Dementors sucked away emotions every day, the cruelty was comparable to being constantly tortured by the Cruciatus curse. Hagrid is a good person with a simple mind. He has taught him a lot of useful knowledge in the past 6 months. He prefers people like Hagrid to Dumbledore. Anyway, even if Hagrid doesn't go to Azkaban and the matter in the Chamber of Secrets doesn't end, Dumbledore will still be asked to leave the school for a period of time sooner or later. There is no conflict. Moreover, helping Hagrid reverse the case can also reduce Dumbledore's wariness towards him and build a good impression on him. Yes, George, you are right. If Hagrid was really the heir of the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore would not trust him so much. After hearing George's explanation, Harry immediately felt better. You know, ever since the evidence pointed to Hagrid being the successor with a high probability of opening the secret room door, he has been in a bad mood. We really shouldn't just pretend not to know, otherwise if another attack occurs, Hagrid may be arrested as a criminal again. George, let's ask Hagrid together. Hermione also felt that what George said made sense. Ron scratched his head. Well, I hope it was a nice visit. He was already beginning to imagine how awkward it would be when they asked Hagrid if he had let any wild, furry thing out of the castle recently. So that afternoon, they came to Hagrid's hut. Why didn't you tell me in advance so that I could make rock cakes for you? Hagrid, who was dealing with the mole at the school gate, was very happy to see George and the other four appear. Harry and the other two looked at Hagrid and said nervously. Hagrid, we came here to ask you questions this time. George saw that the three of them had been asking you for a long time but couldn't get the questions out, so he simply asked himself. It's like this, Hagrid, we learned that you were expelled from school because of the monster that opened the Chamber of Secrets and caused Myrtle to be killed. I want to ask you what happened. So it's this incident. Hagrid sighed after hearing this. I didn't want to mention this matter again, but now that the Chamber of Secrets has been opened again and 2 attacks have been launched, I think I still have to talk to you about it. I didn't open the Chamber of Secrets that year and was wrongly accused. So next, Hagrid told the whole story of the incident. It turns out that in 1943, when Hagrid was still a student, he once obtained an acromantula egg from a traveller. He secretly hatched it and raised it in Hogwarts, naming it Aragog. Later, the Chamber of Secrets was opened, and a student named Myrtle was killed. Except for Dumbledore, everyone believed that it was Hagrid who opened the Chamber of Secrets and released the acromantula to attack Myrtle. With Dumbledore's strong protection, he was not sent to Azkaban, but was expelled as a gamekeeper. Chapter 97, Passing Through a Sea of Flowers Without Getting a Single Leaf on You. So, the acromantula named Aragog was later sent to the Forbidden Forest by you? Harry demanded. Hagrid nodded. Yes, I also found him a wife named Mosag in the Forbidden Forest. They now have hundreds of descendants. As far as I know, magical animals like the acromantula do not have the ability to petrify people. At this time, George added another sentence. Hermione thought for a moment and said. Since Aragog is in the Forbidden Forest, the monster that comes out of the secret room to attack the students now is not the acromantula, and that attack back then couldn't have been Hagrid. Unfortunately, other than us, no one else will believe this. From the perspective of outsiders, the acromantula in the Forbidden Forest may not be the one released by Hagrid from the secret chamber. There is no evidence to prove it. After leaving Hagrid's hut and confirming that Hagrid was not the man from the Chamber of Secrets, the three Harrys' emotions were obviously much higher. Since Hagrid was wronged, can we find a way to help him? On the way back to the castle, Harry suddenly suggested. Hermione seemed to have similar thoughts. As long as we find a way to lure out the monster and prove that it is not an acromantula, we can resolve the misunderstanding and restore Hagrid's innocence. But the monster seems to have never appeared recently. Could it be over? Ron said worriedly. When George heard the new content discussed by the three people, he couldn't help but sighed secretly in his heart. As expected of you. There are no students in the school who are not afraid of encountering the monster in the secret room. You three are actually thinking about how to lure the monster out. Actually, although George lamented the recklessness of the three of them, he had similar thoughts. However, he is different, he is not reckless, he has his own considerations. He knew that the monster in the secret room was a basilisk, and he also knew that the basilisk had a fatal weakness. The basilisk is the most terrifying magical animal hatched by ancient wizards who placed eggs in the bellies of toads and used black magic. Not only does it have deadly fangs and a huge body, but its eyes also have terrifying magic that can glare at anyone to death and turn it into stone even if it reflects light. However, this powerful magical creature also has a natural enemy, which is a rooster. As long as it encounters a rooster crowing, the basilisk will basically lose any attack power, and may even be frightened to death on the spot. That's why Voldemort controlled Ginny and secretly killed all the big roosters Hagrid had raised. George returned to Diagon Alley this Christmas. In addition to learning how to make wands, he actually secretly bought several big roosters and kept them in boxes he made with the invisible stretching charm. The purpose is to use it to deal with the basilisk when your life is in danger. Of course, if you just want to help Hagrid reverse the case, you don't have to actually kill the basilisk. You just need to let everyone know that the monster in the secret room is a basilisk. And he won't use the big cock trick unless absolutely necessary. Because neither the box of the seamless stretching spell nor the big rooster raised in advance is difficult to explain. But that's a story for another day. The diary is still in Harry's hands. It will take some time until Ginny finds out that she stole the diary back and the basilisk will appear again. The most important thing for him now is to learn the Divine Edge Shadowless Curse. Time flies, and soon it's February 14th, which is Valentine's Day. As soon as he arrived at the auditorium in the morning, he found that the decoration of the auditorium had changed. The four walls were covered with large dazzling pink flowers, and there were many heart-shaped confetti that kept changing from light blue to falling from the ceiling. It looks pretty good. No wonder witches like it so much. Seeing the little witches entering the Great Hall with their eyes filled with love, George couldn't help but admire Lockhart's ability in this area. At the same time, he also lamented that whether they are ordinary people or wizards, as long as they are women, most of them cannot resist these more romantic scenes. On the other hand, the expressions of some wizards were not so good. After Harry and Ron entered the Great Hall, they saw Lockhart in bright pink robes with disgusted expressions and felt like they were going to vomit. As for the professors at the long table on the high platform, they seemed to be in a bad mood at the moment, especially Professor Snape, as if someone had just poured him a large glass of bone spirit. Once most of the young wizards had arrived in the Great Hall, Lockhart began his special Valentine's Day morale-boosting plan. That is to use 12 dwarfs with golden wings, carrying harps on their backs, pretending to be the gods of love, to send Valentine's Day cards to the little wizards at school. If the little wizard has someone he likes, just write a Valentine's Day greeting card and give it to the dwarves, and they will help deliver it to that person. If necessary, they can also help read it out to express their love. Lockhart even encouraged everyone to ask Snape for advice on how to refine love potions and Flitwick for psychedelic magic. Regarding these, George just watched the fun and didn't care. After all, to him, his avatar is still a child, and most of the students in the school are underage, so he has no plans to fall in love or anything like that. Falling in love takes time, and now he prefers to spend his time learning magic. There is no time to fall in love, but the opportunity to learn magic is not easy to come by. Besides, he takes things like falling in love lightly. Experience in his previous life told him that love is not a necessity. If the body needs it, he can find someone to satisfy it. After that, everyone goes their separate ways and is just a passerby in their own lives. Since he came into contact with magic, he felt that magic was what he really wanted to pursue, and everything else had to stand aside. Passing through the flowers without getting a single leaf on him, this is his attitude towards the opposite sex. God of Swords. In the Forbidden Forest, George waved his wand, and a transparent sharp blade flew out of his wand, successfully hitting the fleeing mole in front of him, causing it to tear its skin and flesh on the spot. Paige, who was flying above George's head, immediately swooped over, caught the mole in his mouth, and swallowed it in one bite. There was no class in the morning. After breakfast, George quietly came to the Forbidden Forest to practice the God of Swords and Shadows, and the objects of his practice were various small animals in the Forbidden Forest. Just like the fire spell is a small flame if it is not used well, and it can even turn into a sea of fire if it is used well, the God of Swords and Shadows is the same. Getting started is like George now, only able to shoot one at a time, and the power is average. Once you really master it, you can shoot more than one at a time, and the size of each transparent blade will be more than that. As long as you study it deeply enough, it is not impossible to split a person in half with one blade. So even if you get started, you must study and practice frequently and not slack off. I didn't go to the Great Hall for lunch at noon, but ate rock cakes in Hagrid's room. To be honest, if his physique was not much better than that of a normal wizard and his teeth were not strong, he really couldn't bite the rock cake. But in terms of taste, it's really good, Hagrid is not exaggerating. Chapter 98. The Birth of the Super Wand. After eating rock cakes at Hagrid's, he returned to the castle, as he had classes to attend in the afternoon. However, as soon as he walked into the castle hall, he was caught by a dwarf, who stuffed a bunch of Valentine's Day cards into George's hands, then picked up a harp and began to play. This also attracted many little wizards who came to watch the fun, and of course there were also little witches who wrote cards. George did not leave quickly, because that would only make the dwarfs chase him and play, which would make the scene more embarrassing. He just held a bunch of Valentine's Day cards, listened to the dwarf's performance generously, and then smiled. "Thank you for your love for me. I will read every card carefully after I go back." Putting away the cards, he walked out of the crowd calmly. But during this period, he actually found a 7th grade witch in the crowd. The look in her eyes seemed to be a little wrong when she looked at him, which made him a little surprised. Could it be that she also had a copy of my card? In total, he received at least more than 30 Valentine's Day cards. Even if all the little witches in the 1st grade wrote him cards, there should not be so many. So there must be witches from other grades who also wrote him a card. If it's for the 2nd and 3rd graders, it's understandable, but for the 7th graders, aren't you going too far? There's a 6 or 7 year difference. This reminded him of the peanut butter teacher in Shameless. Well, it seems to have a different flavor. On the way to the classroom, he also saw Harry being entangled by the dwarfs, and Malfoy snatching the Valentine's Day card from Harry and reading it in public. In the end, Harry used the disarmament spell to successfully take back the Valentine's Day card written to himself. The disarmament spell is called the disarmament spell, but it is not only for disarming weapons. Its main function is to forcibly knock out the things in the enemy's hands, and also knock out the enemy. So no matter whether you have a wand, a sword, a rocket launcher, a piece of toilet paper, or a cup of milk tea, you will be bounced out. Ignoring this little farce, George came to the Transfiguration classroom. Both classes in the afternoon were Transfiguration classes. Today we are going to talk about GAMP's basic Transfiguration law. Professor McGonagall was teaching with a serious face, and George was also taking notes seriously. GAMP's basic Transfiguration law is the basic law that must be followed by Transfiguration in this world, and it is a law that must be known if you want to learn Transfiguration. Generally speaking, Transfiguration cannot create food out of thin air, and cannot maintain the transformation permanently. For example, if you turn a table into a pig, it will be restored once the magic power dissipates. Transfiguration cannot transform magical items, cannot change the quantity, and cannot create something out of nothing. How can it be so strong? George, who was listening to the class and taking notes seriously, suddenly stopped writing, with a surprised expression on his face. It turned out that the clone in the fairy tale world had a big harvest at this time. God of Swords. George stood in the woods behind the guild, took out the latest wand in his hand, and cast a God of Swords. A 1-meter-long transparent blade burst out from the wand, directly cutting off a large tree in front of it, and the power was more than 10 times stronger than the God of Swords he used in the Harry Potter world. This scene shocked him. Natsu's hair is so strong. It turned out that he had used his own cat hair as the core to make a wand, but the effect was only slightly stronger than his original wand in the main world. Later, he bought the hair of a magical creature with good strength from other members of the guild and made another wand. This time the effect of the wand was obviously much better, even better than the wand in the Harry Potter world. In the past 2 days, Natsu, Lucy, and Happy finally completed the task of finding the book and returned to the guild. He quietly pulled out a hair from Natsu to make the third wand. The result was the scene just now. The bonus of the new wand increased his magic power by more than 10 times. It was simply a super wand. He felt that even the old wand in the Harry Potter world should not have such a good effect. The wands of the 3 wands were made of the same material he bought from the magic shop. The difference was the core. Natsu's hair was obviously much better than the previous magical creature. Does a dragon slayer really have a physique close to that of a dragon? But even if it is a dragon, this effect is too good. Looking at the new wand in his hand, George couldn't help but sigh again. It seems that in the future, I will also find a way to become a dragon slayer. If he can become a dragon slayer, then his innate abilities will be shared, and his original body and other clones will also have the same dragon slayer physique, so he can pull out his hair to make a super wand. Even if there is a new world and a new clone in the future, there is no need to worry about the problem of the wand. The key is that because he often stays in the guild and doesn't have to do tasks, he has also heard a lot of useful information, including how to become a dragon slayer. Not all dragon slayers have to be like Natsu, who was raised by a real dragon and taught magic since childhood to become a dragon slayer. Like the grandson of President Makarov, one of the S-class wizards of the guild, Laxus Doria, is different from Natsu. According to Myra Jane, Laxus had been weak and sickly since childhood, and his father found a Thunder Dragon Slayer crystal and implanted it into his body, thus making him a powerful Thunder Dragon Slayer wizard. So, as long as he can find a dragon-slaying crystal made from the heart of a dragon and implant it in his body, he can also become a dragon-slaying wizard, or a dragon-slaying magic cat. After all, his body in this world is a cat. The only trouble is that the dragon-slaying crystal is extremely rare and cannot be bought on the market. It is a rare treasure that is worth a lot of money and cannot be found without a certain amount of luck. For a cat like him who stays in the guild every day, it is even more impossible to encounter it. So if he wants to find the dragon-slaying crystal, he will have to take time to go out in the future. Forget it, let's talk about it later. I'd better find a better wand body when I have time. The dragon-slaying crystal is hard to come by, but a better wand body can be found. Now he clearly feels that the wand body of his super magic wand is not worthy of the wand core. If he finds a better wand body, the power of the magic wand may be even better. Flames are blazing. Waving the magic wand, George experimented with the second magic again. The fire spell that could only spray out flames for ignition turned into a huge pillar of fire. After that, he experimented with dozens of magics, and he found that compared with other magics, this wand seemed to have better effects on fire, curses and black magic, while other magics were weaker. For example, the power of cursed black magic and fire spells such as the God's Edge Shadowless Curse was increased by about 12 times, while the effect of the Traceless Extension spell and the Repair spell was only 9 times. Natsu was a Fire Dragon Slayer wizard, and he understood that the fire system had additional bonuses, but it was strange that the curse and black magic bonuses were so high. But think about it, it seems so important, anyway, it won't do him any harm. Chapter 100. The Fairy Queen appears. Repair it as before. In the guild hall, George waved his wand, and the damage caused by the fight between the guild wizards was repaired all at once. George, your magic is getting better and better. Myra Jane praised George while wiping the cup at the bar. She remembered that when George first came, he had to cast magic more than 10 times in a row to repair the hall, but now he just sat at the bar and waved his hand to get it done. It's mainly because the president taught well. By the way, why didn't I see the president today? George took a sip of beer glass that was almost as tall as himself. During this period, his repair spell has indeed improved a lot, but it's not so exaggerated. The reason for this effect is mainly because of this super wand made of Natsu's hair as the wand core. Myra Jane smiled and replied. President, he went to attend the routine meeting. Routine meeting, it seems that I have to wait a few days before I come back. I was going to ask him some questions about light magic today. George showed a look of regret. He had learned about the routine meetings, which were meetings where the presidents of regular wizard guilds in various parts of the kingdom gathered regularly to discuss the policies of the council. The kingdom of Fiori was a permanent neutral country with a population of 17 million in this world, and its top leadership was divided into two parts. The first part was the Fiori royal family, which was responsible for maintaining order among ordinary people, and the second part was the Magic Council, which was responsible for maintaining order in the magic world. The top leadership of the Magic Council consisted of a speaker and 9 members, and their main work included monitoring the actions of various wizard guilds, punishing illegal guilds, and hunting down dark guilds. Usually, the council would be held regularly, also in case of emergencies, at the council headquarters. Discuss the recent important developments in the magic world and decide on the course of action. Then these action plans would be conveyed to the presidents of various wizard guilds, and the presidents of various wizard guilds would gather together to discuss how to implement them. Generally, such a gathering would take at least 3 to 5 days. It's not good, AI. Urza, she's back. Just when George finished his beer and was about to go to the basement library to read, the door of the guild was suddenly pushed open, and the possession wizard Rocky announced solemnly. In an instant, the whole guild was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Except for Myra Jane, who was smiling, and Lucy, who was confused, the faces of all the wizards were very stiff, including Natsu, who was usually fearless, and his nemesis Grey. Urza, the Queen of Fairies, is one of the S-class wizards of the guild. George also stopped with interest at this time. Except for the president Makarov, he has never seen an S-class wizard since he joined the guild. Today he can finally see what it looks like. It seems that everyone is afraid of her. Is she difficult to get along with? George returned to the bar. Myra Jane shook her head gently. That's not the case. Urza is a very nice person. She just cares about everyone and works seriously. But I heard from Natsu that Urza can kick 2 mountains away with 1 kick. At this time, Lucy, who heard George and Myra Jane chatting, also came over. That's not the case. Because Natsu once challenged Urza and was beaten half to death, so his words may be a bit exaggerated. Myra Jane covered her mouth and chuckled. Even Natsu was beaten half to death. Lucy showed a surprised expression on her face. It was because they had done the task together that she knew how powerful Natsu was. The uncle Makeo, who was good at using purple flame fire magic, also gossiped after hearing this. Once Grey was wandering around the guild without clothes, and was beaten half to death by Urza when he saw him. And when Rocky joined the guild and wanted to pursue Urza, he was also beaten half to death. Kana put down the barrel and added with gloating. George looked at the guild gate and became more and more interested in the fairy queen. I heard that Urza used the dress-up magic. Natsu, Grey, and Rocky are currently recognized as the strongest wizards below S level in Fairy Tail, but they seem to be no match for Urza. As far as he knows, Urza's dress-up magic is not that powerful. He had encountered similar wizards before joining Fairy Tail. It is a dress-up magic, but not an ordinary dress-up magic. It is a dress-up knight. It can not only summon magic weapons, but also magic armor. But even if she doesn't wear magic armor, Urza's strength is not comparable to that of an ordinary dress-up magician. She passed the S-level magician assessment when she was 15 years old. Myra Jane smiled and said to George. Magic is not strong or weak, but wizards are strong or weak. Find the magic that suits you best. As long as you work hard, you will definitely become a powerful wizard. Lucy and others beside him looked encouraged when they heard Mirajana's words, but George didn't think so. That's true. Even with the simplest magic, a powerful wizard can defeat those wizards who are weak but have strong magic. But if the wizards are equally powerful, the one with stronger magic will definitely be more powerful. For example, if 2 wizards with the same magic power use Fire Dragon Slayer magic and the other uses ordinary fire magic, there is no way they can fight. Ordinary fire magic has no advantage over Fire Dragon Slayer magic. Even Natsu, who uses Fire Dragon Slayer magic, can swallow all the ordinary fire magic in one gulp to increase the power of his Dragon Slayer magic. Myra Jane said this to encourage everyone, especially to encourage wizards like George, who she thinks have no offensive power. But George is a very rational and realistic person. He has great ambitions. As long as he has time, he will not only focus on one or two kinds of magic, but will learn all kinds of magic, including lost magic, super magic, celestial magic, etc. His concept is very simple. As a magician, the more magic he masters, the closer he can get to the true meaning of magic. Look at President Makarov. In addition to being proficient in giant magic and light magic, he also knows a lot of fire, ice, and other magic. And because he is not in one world, but in multiple worlds, and there may even be other worlds in the future, it is more suitable for him to take the almighty magic development route. Boom! 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 Heavy footsteps sounded outside the guild, as if a giant was slowly approaching, and the wizards in the hall all swallowed their saliva. Soon, a beautiful wizard with long red hair, wearing silver armor on her upper body, a blue short skirt and black boots on her lower body, appeared at the door of the guild. However, this female wizard did not appear with empty hands, but was holding up an oversized horn with one hand. George estimated that the horn weighed at least 2 tons, which is equivalent to holding a Hummer with one hand in modern times.